China versus Poland up next as our halfway point through the day. And this is a big match. I've been looking forward to this one, Derek, I have to admit. Poland obviously become quite a big team here in the Hearthstone Global Games. They're 2-0 and also Production's pick. We are in Poland, so it's sort of the local team. And then China just been dominating all of the teams it's been up against so far. The USA, France, that's some good performances right there.
Yeah, I am very excited to get into this game, both for kind of professional and personal reasons. When I was at the Summer Champs recently, one player from both of these teams were both there in Lee and A83650. And while I didn't get to talk to Lee quite as much due to language barriers, A8, it was really nice to hang out with him. He's a really lovely guy, and he thinks about the game in a very, very clever way. So I think he's a real asset to the team of Poland, as we are going to take a look at the players on each of those teams. And I would say even outside of the kind of the highlight players in A8 and Lee due to their recent success, there's some very strong players on both teams here. These are two teams, I would say, that are not getting the respect they deserve at the moment.
Well, they are sitting at 2 wins, 0 losses in the Hearthstone Global Games, which means one of these teams will be 3 wins and 0 losses after today. And at that point, the team has definitely earned the respect. You know, given that we've said they probably need 4 wins. 4 wins, 2 losses is kind of the break point to get in. Being 3-0, you're almost there.
Yeah, pretty much. It just puts you in such a good spot. You are still going to be matched up against the other players who are 3-0, or at the very least a very positive record, as that's how the Swiss format works here. But that's still fine. Like, you know, there are some teams who, to be honest, you may not be that scared of facing up at that record, who have done very well, but are not the real powerhouses that we've seen in this tournament, as other teams like France, Germany, USA, obviously at the bottom of the ladder, have not been getting those consistent victories like teams like Spain, Italy, and China, Poland have been getting.
You have to remind me, Derek, just while I'm thinking about it. Like, next time we see the Poland images, where they are next time we're casting Poland, remind me to point out where we are, because you can literally see
should we wave and see if they can see us?
Yeah, you can pretty much see our current location in one of the videos. Let's take a look at the team's picks and bans. Coming in first, we have, drumroll please, Druid and Warlock banned on Poland's side. Okay, that's different.
Yeah, it is a bit different, but it makes a decent amount of sense to me. Obviously, the Druid is something you're going to want to get rid of just due to its raw power. The Warlock is kind of an interesting one, as China doesn't really have any kind of focus on a specific style of play. Like, they haven't gone all out aggressive or control. I guess it's just going for a similar reason of it's just pretty good.
Yeah, makes sense though. One of the things that A8 was saying to me about China's lineup a little bit earlier today was that they've got weird decks.
They have got
They've
very
just got weird decks across the board. Odd Warrior, Kingsbane Rogue, a very strange Shadowwalk Shaman list. And what Team Poland are hoping is that basically China lose to themselves.
Right, that's a good way of putting it. Is there's so much importance in Hearthstone, in any tournament, whether it's Conquest, Last Hero Standing, or the HGG format, of how you prep and the decks that you choose to bring. And I believe A was telling you his exact wording was that Kingsbane Rogue is just fake news.
Fake news was what he said. Let's take a look and see what the Kingsbane Rogue will be up against. It's going to be the first game, and it's going to be up against Token Druid for Dorito.
Yeah, which is a very interesting one to think about. Like, we haven't been able to come to a consensus as to who we think definitively is going to be in a good spot there, because obviously Kingsbane Rogue is not a common deck. You will not see it on the ladder very often at all. The much more popular Odd Rogue and, to an extent, Miracle Rogue are far more widely represented here at the global games. And, you know, China does have some nice tools at their disposal. Obviously, Fan of Knives to deal with the Whispering Woods, maybe a Blade Flurry to get through a slightly bigger board, and then obviously Vanish as the key trump card in that matchup. Prep Vanish is really what they're looking towards to try and dominate the board. But even then, as I go through it, I'm thinking about if you prep Vanish a bunch of Wisps, brilliant. They've got like 6 Wisps in hand. They just play them out again. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of the things A8 was saying to me earlier as well was that their preparation sort of focused on the fact that China, for the first 2 weeks of the Hearthstone Global Games, they brought the same lineup.
Right.
They were greed, and it worked. And so Team Poland sort of planned for China to bring the same lineup again, and they almost did, apart from the Kingsbane Rogue and the Aggro Mage was the other big surprise. And A8 said to me, okay, the Aggro Mage has caught us by surprise a little bit. That's going to be good against our lineup. However, again, Kingsbane Rogue, fake news. Well, let's find out if Kingsbane Rogue really is fake news or not.
And it's interesting you talk about the decision to go for aggro mage instead of big spell mage, because that's probably one of the big reasons why Poland decided to go for the slightly less popular token druid, whereas most people are going for Malagos druid at this point. They were basically going for this, I would imagine, as token druid up against big spell mage is a fantastic matchup. It's incredibly difficult to lose that one, whereas Malagos is pretty bad. You're generally just going to find yourself unable to deliver enough damage to close out the game through a combo. But as we can see here, for China, not really the kind of hand they are looking for. Obviously, they want to be going for some cards to deal with what their opponent wants to do, like Fan of Knives, as we mentioned, Blade Flurry. But I think primarily it's their own game plan they need to be focusing on, kind of ignoring what their opponent is doing in the early turns, because it won't be much development onto the board anyway. It's likely to just be wild growth, nourish, stuff like that. So Omega Zero is looking for cards obviously like the Kingsbane, Cavern Shiny Finder, and even something like the Elven Minstrel could be a very nice way to just get through to those key cards in this matchup.
I have to admit, Leeching Poison can come in handy a lot in a lot of the matchups for the Rogue, actually. I feel like it's one of the key cards that they need to draw. Just as a way of just healing back up again and preventing large chunks of damage coming in. However, as you said, the lack of any sort of AoE is a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
So many options.
And now for both players, not really anything to do in the... Okay, well, there wasn't really anything to do in the early stages of the game. As I believe Dawido also having a little chuckle there as he picks up the Wild Growth on turn 2, which generally feels like a fantastic play to me. Very nicely done there by Poland.
Wild Growth on turn 2, Nourish on turn 4. All he needs to do is pick up Ultimate Infestation and he's good to go.
Well, you say that, but this, and obviously that would be a very nice pickup at this point, but in Token Druid, this feels to me like it's the Druid deck where you are most allowed to draw off of Nourish. Or I shouldn't even say allowed, you are kind of demanded to a lot of the time, because you need to group together a lot of those combo cards early on with cards like the Whispering Woods into a Soul of the Forest. Or even just getting through to an early Malfurion, something like that can all be very important in this matchup. And I think because of the fact that he has no other draw cards whatsoever in his hand, this Nourish probably will be drawn with.
Yeah. Yeah, well, now that he's able to just curve into the Violet Teacher, that's a good start. And then depending on what the next draw is, okay, if it is Ultimate Infestation, sure, you can ramp with the Nourish. But otherwise, as you said, the Token Druid is capable of really ending up with the dry hand, and Dawido doesn't want to let that happen. As now Omega Zero, they have Captain Greenskin, they have Deadly Poison, they have Doomerang, and they have Leeching Poison, or the Leeching Blade, but there's no weapon in the hand. That's an issue.
There is no Kingsbane quite yet, and you really don't want to be using those buff weapon cards on anything other than the Kingsbane row, apart from in the super aggro matchups where you just need to stabilize onto the board.
That's pretty unfortunate, having to use the Doomerang to combo into the Eviscerate. And it's very unfortunate that Omega Zero hasn't drawn the weapon yet, because they run two copies of the 2-mana card that draws it out. They run a Witchwood Piper to get the 2-mana card to draw out the weapon, and obviously the weapon itself. So chances of drawing the weapon are quite high all the time. It's
true. But, I mean, you said that Omega Zero having to go with the Doomerang. He did not. Like, I agree he pretty much had to kill off the Violet Teacher there, or nothing was happening for him. As Poland juggle at Ultimate Infestation off the top after they draw. But China could have gone coin into the Eviscerate and daggered up again, which would have obviously left them without the coin, which is a very valuable card in this matchup. Like, for example, another Violet Teacher could have come down, at which point you have to go coin Valspine, which is a very strong play then. Or maybe he wants to go for the coin for a turn earlier Valera, or just fit in one of those other key combo cards. Whereas I think the Doomerang is probably a pretty good spot, isn't going to be that useful in this matchup. You don't need to take out those high health, high attack targets, because there's only 4 minions in the entire deck pretty much from the Druid.
Vitally now, though, the weapon is online. They can even equip the Deadly Poison if they want to. It's no longer a dead card in the hand. And now it's all about the removal, isn't it? The AoE, rather. They run 2 copies of Fan of Knives, they run 1 copy of Blade Flurry, and they run 2 copies of Vanish. So again, chances of drawing them are quite high. Omega Zero is going to want to draw their Sprint sooner or later so that they can guarantee these important tools.
And I think even more than Sprint, it's some of the other key cards in this matchup, like, for example, well, there's no Faldore Striders in this deck, which
Oh, interesting.
pops in relatively often, which I find quite interesting. But the Elven Minstrel, I suppose, is the other card they're really looking for, just to get those key minions into play, whilst they're also getting the draw, because obviously the Cutthroat Buccaneer can be very valuable in this matchup, just to bump up the attack and get something onto the board.
Doritos ended up with a handful of nothing for this turn, though. Like, he can Wild Growth, he can start to head towards Ultimate Infestation, but it's going to be difficult to empty his hand to the point where he can play Ultimate Infestation. Obviously, he's got Whispering Woods, Soul of the Forest, which he can play next turn if he chooses to play the Wild Growth now. But he's got to be thinking about that Vanish. Is it correct to play around it, or do you think he should just go all in as fast as he can?
Okay, so you never win this matchup if you don't make a big board at some point. So how do you make it the best play to play around that? Obviously, if you just go Whispering Woods, you get blown out by Phantom Knives, which is not good enough. Whereas if you go Whispering Woods into Soul of the Forest, you demand either a Vanish as the primary option, which would still be not that bad for you, I would argue.
Okay.
Or Fan of Knives into Fan of Knives into Blade Flurry, which is also a way they can clear off both waves of those minions.
Right.
But I think here for Dawado, it should just be going with the Whispering Woods, Soul of the Forest, because it demands from your opponent that instant answer. If they don't have it, you pretty much just win. If they do have it, though, you're in a fantastic spot.
It's not as though he has a handful of other options, though. Like, he's got Violet Teacher into, what, double Spellstone to create some 1/1s? It's okay,
It's
but
not bad either, actually.
it's okay, but because the weapon's there, the weapon has 4 attack. It
Plus
would
Fan of Knives.
lower the Violet Teacher to 1, and then Fan of Knives would deal with everything. That's the issue.
Good point. And as I mentioned, that the downside of going for Whispering Woods, Soul of the Forest immediately is you have literally no buff cards to go with that wide board quite yet. And generally, you want to go for making a wide board on the first turn of your combo. And the next turn, if you don't win the game immediately, you want to get yourself incredibly close to it, where you're just basically unable to lose at that point. Whereas clearly they are thinking in this scenario, if we do go for Whispering Woods Soul and we are met with a Vanish, we're not in that good of a spot. Which is why I was actually looking at this play he goes for, where you clear off the board, you don't make the strongest immediate play that you can, but you might bait out the Fan of Knives, very importantly, because he knows that this is a pretty enticing board for Fan of Knives.
Does that matter too much for China, though? If they do cast the Fan of Knives, they still run another copy in the deck, they've still got the Vanish, they've still got the Blade Flurry. Do you think this is a target worthy of Fan of Knives, or will China try and hold that back?
Yeah, I think if they have any other option, China will be very, very happy to go with that. Like Valspine here.
Options.
Yeah, exactly. Valspine here, fine, perfectly good. Like how you activate it is a little bit weird, but
there's a few ways, though. There's preparation.
Coin, Valspine, Leeching Poison seems pretty good.
Yeah, that seems fine. If they wanted to, they
options.
could hit in with the weapon, the dagger first into the 1/1, equip the new dagger, and then play Valspine, although losing the legendary weapon is not a great idea.
Yeah, I think with no Witchwood Piper, Cavern Shiny Finder, or Elven Minstrel at this point, that's a little bit shaky.
This is where something like a prep sprint would be very handy, to just fill up China's hand with more tools. Gonna go with your play, which I think is like just obviously the one to think about. Again, it's very helpful to have that Leeching Poison equipped, and he's gonna hold it back as a combo activator. That's a surprise. I'm struggling to think of the reasons of not playing that card.
Yeah, because obviously the buff would stay on it. You wouldn't want to. I mean, if you save it now, it's always going to be good with the Blade Flurry, unless he wants to go for like Wicked Knife, Leeching Poison, Blade Flurry. That doesn't make any sense.
No. Oh, literally the only thing I can think of is saving it as a combo activator, but they've got prep in hand. They've got a 1-attack weapon, which again, they don't really want to, a 1-mana weapon rather, which they don't really want to play. Okay, sure. It's not like they desperately need the healing right now anyway, so maybe it's not even worth arguing about it. Because 29 health.
That's the point.
It was just more a question of why not play the card.
Yeah. So now for Dawado, things get a little bit more enticing here to go for Whispering Woods into Soul of the Forest. because the fact that you now have a buff card, so you can potentially move towards a lethal possibility on the following turn. And even if not, you want to dump cards for Ultimate Infestation on the following turn. You just need to get rid of cards from your hand at this point. As they're now for China, they've got the Fan of Knives, but they do not have the follow-up quite yet. If they go for Fan here, it pretty much
buffs their board.
Exactly. It buffs every minion on the opponent's board by 2. They could then obviously trade in with the Dagger and the Valspine. But basically, they want to hit either Vanish or the Blade Flurry off the top to go with the prep.
So the two different ways they can approach that is play the Fan of Knives and hope to get this Vanish or Blade Flurry, or they could just put the weapon and minion into a 1-1 and then the 2-2 that it summons and leave the rest of the 1-1s alive, but that's such a risky play.
Yeah, and obviously with this kind of line of play, they need to be making risky plays like this, I think, if they're going to have any chance. And they do not find the card they were looking for off the top. So 5 minions will be left around on the board.
Talcreep is a good pickup though. Like Omega Zero can still deal with 2 of these 2-2s, and then I mean, as we can see, there's only the 1 buff, the branching pass in the hand to actually deal the damage. So it's nowhere near lethal just yet. That is going to help though. So now they're 5 attack each.
Yeah. So
20 damage to the face.
It's 1 off lethal because you can go double Spellstone Hero Power to take out the Tar Creeper as well. Yeah, I think, unless I'm missing something else, it's very, very close to the point where you can just close out the game. And even then, you know that your opponent now does not have Vanish unless they got it off the top, and they don't have a prep, which obviously you don't know if they have or not.
Yeah.
But basically, you're putting yourself in a very likely scenario where you can just win the game on the following turn. Because first of all, they have to have healing to survive against Ultimate Infestation, and then they also have to clear your board. And I love just going for it here. Like, you need to capitalize on the fact that you have a wide board right now.
There's just no harm in putting the rogue down to 1 health.
Yep.
I guess the counter to that would be, or rather, the reason that Omega Zero held back Leeching Poison, maybe to mask the fact that it's there.
That's a good point.
As they could now potentially get some burst healing.
It has to be Leeching Poison Blade Flurry. That's the out, and that's the only out.
I'd hate to say it, but I don't even think that works. I don't believe that the lifesteal works off the Blade Flurry.
Oh, really? Oh, my mistake.
It's a pretty strange interaction there. I had to go with this Kingsbane Rogue last week.
Oh, destroy your dagger and deal its attack damage. Right, okay, yeah.
It's a very weird interaction.
So many options.
I'm honestly not too sure what the Self Minstrel can pick up that would save them.
There once was a man.
Yeah, none of that going to do it, and so it looks like Dawido, as we kind of expected but weren't necessarily quite sure, is going to be taking a game with the Token Druid, despite the fact that there are some powerful healing options or board removal options available to the Kingsbane Rogue. It's just a little bit too much from Dawido, and it's also worth mentioning, he got a pretty good hand there. The Wild Growth into another Wild Growth, drawing a whole bunch of cards, put down that wide board, and you know, you could argue with his play with the turn of going Violet Teacher Swipe rather than going for a wide board immediately. But I think this gave him the best of both worlds, where you put out a Violet Teacher, if they can't remove that, you kind of win anyway. And even if they can, you have a strong follow-up on turn 9, which leads into an Ultimate Infestation. Like, it's just power turn after power turn.
It's very curious to me that they actually brought the Kingsbane Rogue in the first place, because thinking back, I believe China had Quest Rogue last week.
Right.
And the reason I'm so confused about this is because when we get into the picks and ban stage for this series, the Rogue was their final pick.
Oh, really?
They did not want to play that Rogue. They were
Right.
hoping that would get banned. So yeah, just odd that that's how it's worked out.
I mean, maybe they weren't getting the matchups they wanted to. Like, you're kind of trying to target the slow, control-y decks with the Kingsbane Rogue more than anything else, but even then, it's a weird one.
Let's take a look at what's coming up next. Next up, it's going to be Trunks on the Odd Paladin versus Dogmeat on the Death Rattle Hunter. Now, Death Rattle Hunter's major weakness actually are these very, very aggressive decks like the Odd Paladin, because yeah, okay, the Hunter gets an explosive mid-game, but the Paladin gets an explosive start.
Yeah, they do indeed, and they also get a very good mid-game. Like, if you're not clearing off the 1-1s every single turn, you will simply be overrun. And even if you do have a 5-5 or a couple of 5-5s. You need to make such a dominant display of board control or even just board presence, not necessarily fighting back against their board, in order to race against them. Like, you can get yourself into those kind of scenarios where, you know, if you're sticking some of the more powerful mid-game minions, you can start to value trade, or if you get an early candle shot and a Keleseth, buffing up an egg, stuff like that has to happen if you're really going to want to try and fight back against the odd paladin.
They do run 2 copies of Defender of Argus, which can help, actually, buffing up these eggs and adding a little bit of defensive capability, which with Grizzly can be a big card, and Deathstalker Rexar himself, before the 1/1s have been buffed into 3/3s to clear the board one more time, and then start getting silly cards like Bloatbat and things like that. So it is winnable for the Hunter. I mean, it's always winnable for the unfavored deck, but it's pretty clear why the Paladin is the favorite here. Just to move forward after that, the following matchups will be Taunt Warrior versus Odd Warrior. To Poland on the Taunt Warrior, China on the Odd Warrior. Then Poland on the Miracle Rogue versus China on the Shadowwalk Shaman. I know that you're a bit of a Miracle Rogue connoisseur, Derek, so we'll rely on your knowledge for that one. And then finally, Aggro Mage versus Even Warlock. So Aggro Mage on Poland's side. I have to admit, apart from this coming game, it does look like a series which is heavily favoured to China, at least from my perspective. Sorry, to Poland.
Right,
at
yes.
least from my perspective.
I quite agree with you. Yeah, they've got one very good matchup here coming up with the Odd Paladin. But then outside of that, the Taunt Warrior versus the Odd Warrior, obviously things could go in any number of ways in that matchup because it's not a matchup we've seen all too much. Odd Warrior is not a tier 1 deck, tournament or ladder at the moment, but China obviously opting to bring it here anyway. But generally, from what I'm hearing in that matchup, you're just going to be pretty favoured as the Taunt Warrior. That hero power, once the Ragnaros gets equipped, the Sulfuras gets equipped, is just too strong. You will eventually burn out the Odd Warrior, even if they've gained however much stupid amount of armor from Tank Up.
Just glancing at my notes again, though, we've been talking about Poland saying that the Kingsbane Rogue was fake news. According to that game, at least, they were right. Just showing how much China didn't want to play it. The last 2 decks that China had available to them were Mage and the Rogue. And Poland banned the Mage. They're like, look, we just want to play against that Rogue deck. It's just strange. Like, we saw some success from the Kingsbane Rogue last week, but it is by no means like a legitimately approved deck. You know, it's not something that pro players have ever really spoken highly of at all.
Well, I mean, pro players love that deck. Like, so many players I've talked to have just talked about how much they loved Kingsbane Rogue when the Cold Light Oracle was still in the meta.
Sure.
Obviously a lot less now. It's decreased in power level drastically. But even so, I think for China, they're thinking there may have just been, which is a pretty classic school of thought in Hearthstone, I cannot outplay Poland enough by just bringing the same decks. Like, they're a strong opponent. I don't think that we are that much better than them to just rely on our play to win that. We need to rely on getting these weird decks that they may not be able to know how to play against. Maybe we can get some crazy scenarios to occur, because Kingsbane Rogue is a pretty crazy deck. Some stupid stuff can happen with that Kingsbane. But even then, as we saw, Poland just relying in terms of sheer raw firepower with the decks, just how good their decks are coming out on top.
So another thing that was pretty interesting to me about my conversation with A8 was, now I feel like we're getting into Conquest pick order territory here, so I've got to be a little bit careful. But he said, we analysed China's pick orders over the first 2 weeks and tried to use that data to get the best matchups. Which is the reason I say we're talking about Conquest pick order is because if China just do it at random, if they just use a random number generator or something, then there is no way to get an advantage in that way. But it's something that Poland did try to do.
Yeah, it's true. And that's where, you know, most of the skill in the HGG format comes in with the picks and bans rather than the queue order. But still, I think Poland did a pretty good job with the picks and bans. They got themselves the highest chance of getting those queue orders favorably and getting rid of the decks that they were pretty vulnerable against. I mean, like, leaving up, as we keep mentioning, the Kingsbane Rogue just kind of felt like a free choice for them. And that's why the HGG format is so interesting, because every single one of your decks you bring can just be left until that final point. You will have to play it unless you've already lost or won.
It's quite funny because, as well, they were saying that China have the weirdest lineup because they have Odd Warrior, Kingsbane Rogue, a strange Shadowwalk Shaman, and they left all of those decks unbanned. They're like, yeah, China, play. We've just brought what's good. You play your weird stuff. We'll just beat you. We said the Shadowwalk Shaman's weird. Maybe it's a slight exaggeration. Like, it's not that
It's not the fashionable variant.
But it runs 2 copies of Doomsayer, a Murmuring Elemental, and Pyromancers instead of Keleseth. Doomsayer is really like, because you could easily make the argument, oh yeah, Doomsayer fits in Shadowwalk Shaman. It's just a defensive control tool, but it's not usually played in Shadowwalk.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many good cards you want to put in that deck. Like, obviously, it's not that bad. It can clear the board against aggressive decks leading into your turn 3, which is obviously a very important turn for the Shadowwalk Shaman to play either Manatide Totem or Acolyte of Pain. But they are having to cut some pretty key cards from that matchup, some pretty key anti-aggro cards as well. Like, I believe one copy of a Lightning Storm has gone, a Mind Control tech. There are no Mind Control techs in the deck at all. So it's an interesting variant of the deck, may or may not work out for them, especially as they have the combination of what both Hemmet and...
Wait, what?
they've got Hemmet and Murmuring Elemental. It's a very weird build of the deck, and I think there's a reason why it's not the fashionable variant, if I'm perfectly honest.
Well, the other thing about Doomsayer at the moment is that there are a lot of eggs around.
That's true.
Like,
That's
just,
a good point.
Death Battle
That's a
Hunter
very good
being
point.
in the meta
Yeah.
makes Doomsayer a worse card than it was before.
Yep.
The same with Cube Warlock, really. Just any deck where you actually want your minions to be destroyed, your opponent playing Doomsayer is just a big risk all of a sudden.
But then again, then I guess you could argue against the slower control decks like Shadowwalk Shaman, do you want your eggs to die? Like a 5/5 is good, but is it game-winningly good? Whereas if you go egg into Terrascale, Stalker, and all that other nonsense...
I'll tell you what, Derek. I'll tell you what. When the expansion comes out, if I'm playing a priest and I only have one card left, nothing left on my deck, one card in my hand, don't play Doomsayer. Because I guarantee you it's Mechathune.
Okay. I cannot wait.
As we finally get into the game.
Yeah. And now for Trunks here on the Odd Paladin, it's a little bit less about what they can draw because, again, odd and even decks get you a very high amount of consistency. Odd decks in particular, I find, just because of how much you want to spam that hero power due to it being upgraded in terms of its effect. It's just a very strong play every single turn. Whereas for Poland, I don't know, like, these are some of the better cards in the matchup. Like, Flanking Strike is a nice tempo swing back in their favor. Deathstalker Rexar is obviously pretty much their only board clear.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if it's optimistic enough. Like, do they need to be going for their cards like... Well, actually, they're not playing Prince Keleseth, are they? They're playing the Loot Hoarder variant.
Oh, really?
Oh, no, sorry, China is playing the Keleseth variant. Oh, no, but it's... Whew, that was a journey.
Let's try again.
Poland are playing
Loot
the
Hoarders,
Loot
like
Hoarder
you said,
version, yeah.
Keeping the Rexar, though, and it is a risky move, as they had no playable cards for the first few turns in the hand when they did that Mulligan, and still don't. Argus is one of the better cards, though. If they can pick up a Loot Hoarder on turn 2 into an Egg on turn 3, or some sort of curve like that, then maybe they'll have a chance. As things even up, Hungary versus Malaysia, the score is 2-2. I know that production are definitely going to want to see Malaysia win this one, as Hungary is their second pick.
Yeah, it's one of the, I guess, lower caliber matches that we're seeing this week in Malaysia versus Hungary. Not particularly well-known teams, but at any point, being one of the first teams to leave the global games is going to feel pretty bad no matter where you fall on the tier ladder thing. But we've been kind of lamenting Poland's hand as it's, you know, nothing really going on in the early turns. But for China, this is a very nice opening hand to be moving along with. We could just see double Blessing of Might on the very next turn if they want to go hyper-aggressive and just try and win the game as quickly as they possibly can.
But Dogmeat just failing to draw anything playable at the moment.
I mean, what is there? Like, what could they draw that's actually good at this point? It's Candle Shot is pretty much it. Like, that's the only good card between turns 1 and 2.
Candle Shot and Loot Hoarder. Loot Hoarder is slightly better than a Hero Power, but
Not much.
No.
It is better, though, I agree. It's, yeah. But this is just why it's such a miserable matchup. This is not what the deck is tuned to beat. Otherwise, it would have, obviously, something like a Unleash the Hounds to fight back against this, Tar Creeper, Fireflies, just anything like that to fight back against these boards.
Dogmeat really taking his time there on that turn. I guess he's giving the illusion of having some options in his hand, or taking the opportunity to talk through future turns with his teammate, as you just pulled a pretty disgusted face there, Derek.
I mean, they've gone with the line of play of going 1-drop, 1-drop into 1-drop, 1-drop, and they've drawn Divine Favor. Like, that's the absolute dream as an odd paladin. Like, not pressing your hero power on turn 2 is always kind of risky against these slower control decks, because you can lead to yourself being outvalued. It's just generally not as strong of a play to go for 1-drops instead of the hero power in terms of longevity. But when you have Divine Favor as well, you can just play out your hand as aggressively as you want, fill it all back up. And Dogmeat on Poland's side still hasn't expended a single card from their hand. Everything, the only thing that's been played has replaced itself.
It's like 1 mana 7/1 with Divine Shield. Meanwhile, 3 mana 2/2.
Yeah.
Awesome. Trunks actually opting to run Stonehold Defender in addition to Divine Favor. That's not something we see all too often nowadays. Yeah. But it just doesn't matter because Divine Favor is going to be drawing 1,000,000 cards at some point. Next turn, I guess. China just trying to dominate the board as much as possible this turn before they go ahead and pay Divine Favor. Although it's not even looking like they're going to need the Divine Favor this game. It's just looking like lethal in 2 turns.
Yeah, not at this rate. But however, this kind of starts to present an interesting question for China and Trunks as to how do they deal with what Dogmeat will be throwing down here? Because they have to expect some kind of a minion. When they've just played a Stitch Tracker and nothing else in the early turns, you're going to be expecting to see something like Egg, Houndmaster Shore, some kind of minion that you maybe have to contest, because if you don't, you then start running into Defender of Argus possibilities, which is kind of scary in this scenario. So it would be interesting to see how China fight back against something like this Devilsaur Egg. Because then in, I suppose, the worst case scenario on the next turn, if they don't clear this off, they're met with Defender of Argus into the Candle Shot off the top, which could then clear off the 7/1. But even then, that's not that bad,
or like
to be honest.
Play dead Defender of Argus.
Sure, something like that, yeah.
However, Trunks is just 4 off lethal this turn. This is all going straight to the dome.
And I think this is definitely the way to go about it. Like I was saying, China maybe should be thinking about clearing to play against Argus. But what is there Poland could do in this scenario? They are just dead.
What a blowout game for China there, as Poland played literally 3 cards. They played a 3 mana 2/2, a 3 mana 0/3, and a Defender of Argus over the course of this game.
Yeah. As looking at it, yeah, there's no way that they can stop lethal in any capacity here. And Trunks going to be equalizing the game with their first and, I would argue, maybe only actually favorable game in this series, as they're going up with their Shudderwock Shaman against Miracle Rogue later on, Odd Warrior against Taunt Warrior, and even Lock against Aggro Mage. Poland, despite the fact that the game is evened up to 1-1, still looking to be in a pretty dominant position. But if China were going to have any chance to take this, this is how they're going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it was important that China won that game. It was quite easy for China to win that game, let's be honest.
True.
It was a shame for China that they lost the Kingsbane Rogue game. They didn't draw any Blade Flurry, Vanish, or any real way of removing that board earlier on. That game certainly could have been winnable for them. But now, as you were saying, it's an uphill struggle as next up we have Odd Warrior for China versus Taunt Warrior for Poland. And you said that you'd spoken to the Odd Warrior expert himself about this matchup.
I have indeed. Fury Hunter, previous DreamHack Summer champion of one of the most recent tour stops, an Odd Warrior expert, and I believe we're going to go to a quick break now. But when we come back, I'll give you his breakdown on this matchup.
Bit of a false start there, sorry about that, Derek. But now everyone can look forward to that breakdown. We'll see you then. Welcome back to China versus Poland. Now, before we were so very rudely interrupted by a break, Derek, you were about to tell us that Fury Hunter had given you a breakdown of this Odd Warrior versus Taunt Warrior matchup.
That's exactly right. And for those of you who are unaware, he is the Odd Warrior guy. He's played probably more of this deck than anyone else, brought it to a whole bunch of tournaments when he had no right to do so. He probably shouldn't have done it, yet there he was, playing it away anyway. And we both hypothesized that the Taunt Warrior would be pretty drastically favored, to be perfectly honest, before talking to him, because eventually you'll complete that quest and it will just be too difficult for the Odd Warrior to get anywhere in the matchup. But he said, while it's definitely favorable for the Taunt Warrior, it's far from unwinnable for the Odd Warrior. If they can get an early pack from at least, was one of the main things he talked about working in his favor, or just rack up those hero powers as much as possible and basically try and fatigue the Taunt Warrior, because there's so much more value in your deck. You can get to the position where you will win in the hyper late game. And basically the other thing he said was, as the Odd Warrior, you just have to pray the Taunt Warrior can't complete the quest for ages.
Wow, okay, that seems unlikely nowadays. Like, Taunt Warriors tend to be finishing up that quest and getting the Sulfuras added to the hand very early. I guess the one thing that I can say about it, I guess in Fury Hunter's favor there, with the Odd Warrior having a chance, is that the hero power does gain 4 armor.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're gaining 4
Way better.
armor and your opponent starts dealing 8 damage later on,
Yeah.
maybe that evens out at some point.
That's the thinking, isn't it? That if it takes them long enough, you will have gained enough value to actually just outvalue them with the difference in hero powers. Because even if they just spend, if they hit your face on half the turns and hit your minions on half the turns with the random hero power, that's even. Exactly. You've just got to the point where you're gaining 4 and losing 4.
Dark, it's an odd
It's
deck.
odd. I knew you were going to say that. Knew it, Falco.
You can't say the word even in an odd matchup. Speaking of odd, though, Reckless Flurry, a card which we only really see in odd Warrior decks, that's not going to be all too helpful against the Taunt Warrior, because if what we're saying is that they want to have as much armor as possible, the card just blows up their own armor. That's no good.
Yeah, it's a card that I think, to be honest, was just overrated when people were expecting, were kind of hypothesizing how good it would be before it came out in all the card reviews and stuff. It's turned out to be decent, but not that good. Removing all your armor is just too bad in so many scenarios. It's really only good against some of the more aggressive board-based decks.
Got some of the Rush Warrior cards on each side here. Is Poland running the Militia Commander tech, which we have seen in a few various tournaments recently. Very good against Miracle Rogue. Just 4-mana deal with one of the many 4/4s in the opponent's deck. Not so hot here, though, in a matchup where A8 really isn't going to be contesting for the board most of the time.
As you love here, not even attacking through to face, as we both make a desperate look to see, is there a copy of Battle Rage, as we can see? Yes, there is the Battle Rage in there, and this is pretty clearly indicating what China's game plan is.
Settle down, everyone.
Exactly.
Get
This is going to be a long one. Because obviously if they wanted to go for a more immediate approach to winning the game, locking down board control, which is a valid thing to go for here. We could see Rabbit Worgen, a Darius Crowley, maybe even a Zola on said Darius Crowley to lock down early board. They could go for a very aggressive game plan, which maybe they still will once they get these slightly beefier minions down. I would not be all too surprised to see some kind of a strong push for board made by You Love.
This isn't like straight up Fury Hunter list. It's actually quite far from it. You pointed out to me before there's no King Mosh in this Odd Warrior. And Zola the Gorgon also isn't a common sight in these Control Warrior decks. It combos pretty well with Jihorn Hatchling. It combos even better with Elise the Trailblazer.
Those really are the main ones you're looking to hit, I think. Is if you do want to win in Fatigue, you can shuffle 3 extra cards into your deck at that point, which is very impressive indeed. But for You Love here, the Fatigue counter is probably not his biggest worry, because A8 is very likely to have drawn more cards throughout the series of the game, I would say.
That Tar Creeper is a little bit of a pain here. As you said, China want to really start pushing for the board, but Rabbit Worgen would just charge right in and die. It's really not all that much China can do here.
However, while it is kind of pesky in terms of China trying to develop their own aggressive options, in terms of what Poland is actually doing, it's incredibly little. So that's why I was going to suggest just go with the hero power. Just ignore it. Who cares? On a later date, you can deal with that Tar Creeper. But for the moment, just let it hit you. You're gaining 3 armor per turn overall. That's perfectly good.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It's not exactly like the Tar Creeper's doing all that much work on its own. A8 is going to drop the Acolyte of Pain and hope that he can try and get a couple draws off of this. Maybe it can trade into the Town Crier once, which now begs the question, does China want to prevent the card draw in Poland's deck or give them the card draw? Ironbeak Owl is there if they want to prevent it altogether.
Yeah, a lot of options available here. We could see Shield Slam on the Acolyte of Pain into their own Acolyte of Pain. We could see Shield Slam, like we see here, into Ironbeak. We could have seen Shield Slam into Rabbit Worgen, which, though it wouldn't have denied all draw completely, would have developed their own board a little bit more aggressively. But the way that You Love is going about this, it makes a lot of sense to me to go for this exact play. Maybe not necessarily the Shield Slam aspect of it, but the silence part of it. Because what he's trying to do here is not further his own board presence quite so much. It's just deny draw so that there are no taunts being played for Poland. that is how China does this. They just try and make it as long as possible before the quest can be completed.
I also think there's a very strong chance that the ULOV can just dump Darius Crowley on the board and start to make that thing grow as large as possible. As we can see, currently, there isn't a clear way that A8 can deal with it. Possibly the Militia Commander would end up being his best bet. And there's going to be other stuff on the board too, so it's not going to be this unending threat.
Yeah. But if it does stick around, then, you know, Zola on that is not all too bad, because while we've been talking about how China don't necessarily want to prioritize developing their board presence, and they would much rather focus on disrupting their opponent's quest, developing their own board is still a very good thing to do if they have the mana to spare to do so, because it basically acts as pseudo removal. You can just dominate the board with your minions, and it means still no damage is getting through to face, which is very important to rack up that armor.
There you go. Hungary get the win against Malaysia in the off-stream match. Malaysia, unfortunately, the second team eliminated from the Hearthstone Global Games. I'm sure the production team are very, very happy about that.
Yeah.
Being one of their picks. In fact, they must be on edge right now because both of their picks playing at the same time, Poland and Hungary.
Still, commiserations to Malaysia, one of the lesser-known teams in the Global Games that didn't get all too much recognition last year, I would say, either. But next year, who knows? As A8 still here, just trying to make sure his opponent cannot rack up all that armor that he's clearly trying to do to dominate the board. This makes a lot of sense to me here for A8, because while his primary win condition or his primary game plan is to play those taunts, get that quest online as quickly as he possibly can, just making sure he can keep his opponent's health total nice and low, in a way extends the amounts of turns he has in order to complete the quest, because it's not about anything to do with fatigue for him. It's just to the point where his opponent will have too much armor, so he can't do anything with said quest.
Yeah. I mean, China have illustrated pretty straightforward that they do not believe this is a fatigue match. They are drawing cards for their down criers, and they are preventing card draw on the other side with their Ironbeak Owl. I did like the 3-6 taunt last turn because it value traded the board so well, and that seems to be what China are doing. They're trying to value trade as much as they can. Stonehill Defender is a big draw for Poland, though.
And I do want to actually take umbrage with one thing you said there, which is that China, you said China don't see this as a fatigue game because they're drawing, which I don't think is necessarily correct.
Okay.
Because I totally agree. They are obviously not 100% on the fatigue plan in the way that you might traditionally think so with a control mage mirror or something, where you just want to never draw a card for the entire game. Because this is not necessarily an even mirror match, they're still anticipating that they'll be at least even or ahead on card draw come the end of the game.
Sure.
And they'll have so much armor by that point that just drawing through to their options and denying any draw from their opponent immediately is way more valuable.
You're right. I mean, it's a complicated issue, isn't it? When you have a game that is a fatigue match like that, but like your opponent might draw 3 cards on turn 3, it gives them so many options so early that it can still be correct to make that silence. It's a strange one. As A sort of establishes his dominance on the board there, plays the Dry Whisker now to gain some armor, but he's going to curve into the Gemstone Golem next turn. And that's actually a pretty beefy threat there.
Yeah, it's very threatening indeed. Obviously, with it being an odd warrior, no executes to speak of, and 1 shield slam already been used on just a measly little Tar Creeper, which is kind of understandable. You know, they're the highest value minion innately in the deck is what, the Saronite Chain Gangs. It's very measly indeed.
Darius Crowley comes down, does its thing, and again, we're in this position where A8 is going to have to work quite hard to deal with it.
Yeah, it's going to take something extra, obviously, with the attack, I would imagine, or it doesn't matter into which minion he goes for.
Yeah.
He will get the +2/+2, and it will need 1 extra damage from some other source from A8 in order to clear it off, which is something he probably does need to do with some amount of urgency, unless he wants to go for a brawl early on, which, you know, could be a decent card in the matchup later on. There are some real threats in the Odd Warrior deck.
It would take 1 proc of the Warpath, which now might be even more tempting given the cornered Sentry draw. They can play the Sentry, then play Warpath, and then make the trades.
True.
It does prevent the Gem-Studded Golem play, though. Darius is just such a good card. And I use the word
Yeah.
good very carefully there because it's not crazy powerful, but you know, you put it on the board and it's never bad.
Yeah.
Very rarely bad anyway.
I definitely underrated how good this card would be right at the start. And that's the interesting thing about the Taunt Warrior deck that we see now. It's such a tight deck. Like, you just don't have room for these cards. Even if there's a decent Warrior card, it's just not good enough to play these kind of decent Warrior minions or spells. It has to be so focused on playing taunts, removing, and then killing them with the quest. Like, Darius Crowley just does not get that done.
Gets the ordering perfect there, A8, making sure to only take 1 damage with the Cornered Sentry. And Faceless Manipulator, oh, it's so good with Darius.
Yeah,
that
that would've been
Darius with the
sick.
stick around. Whew. Darius rushes in, gets buffed, then the new one gets played, that rushes in, gets buffed again.
I remember a pretty insane game. I believe it was DreamHack Tour, where it was Chinoy's up against Scruffy, I think, where he was playing I think it was the Odd Warrior that Chinoy's was playing, where his only out was Darius Crowley into Faceless Manipulator because he was getting rinned, basically. Like, he had no choice but to go for that, and he really almost got there. Like, there were some massive Darius Crowleys being made. I'm sure Lorinda will correct me if I got that one wrong, but I seem to remember some kind of a crazy game happening because I was explaining to the Gamers Origin player manager, basically, it's not looking good for Chinoy's.
It's okay. I don't have to listen to Lorinda anymore.
You're welcome, by the way. As both players here kind of slowing down with the actual board development. And I guess for Poland here and A8, the gem-studded golem is a decent way to start ramping that up again. But China now have some very respectable options to fight back against that. Just a Faceless Manipulator on its own is a fantastic way to start pulling things back. And while A8 is on 5 out of 7 quest activators played, there's no guarantee he'll get the others anytime soon.
That's true. They have the shield block, which is just 1 cycle, but then nothing else. And again, this is where the Yulov not attacking the face earlier could come in handy. That Battle Rage is almost always drawing 1 less card than it would have done originally. It's unlikely that Poland run out of armor anytime soon, so yeah, they're just not going to take any damage. Gorehowl isn't quite good enough to get rid of that golem just yet, but it's going to do some serious work this game.
That could possibly be pretty important here. Yeah, but even having said that, you don't really want to be attacking into minions. You just want to ramp up that armor, I think, as much as possible.
True. The big thing is there's no weapon removal in Poland's deck. So whenever it gets played, it just sits there.
And the interesting thing here, as we take a look at the deck size counter that our wonderful production team so kindly have put there, China are pretty far behind in terms of fatigue now. 3 extra cards having been drawn and an Acolyte of Pain still on the board. Now means that Poland, if they do enter a super late game scenario, you know, Fury Hunter was telling me that's good for China. The later it goes, the better it is, because the later the quest activation happens, the better it is for China. They just want to get it into the hyper late game. And Poland are still in a decent position here if it does end up going to fatigue, however.
Situations like this are so strange, though, that Poland find themselves in now, and the Taunt Warrior seems to find itself in fairly often. We even saw it in the community show yesterday in the Netherlands game, where the Paladin just sort of ran the Taunt Warrior out of stuff. And we've got the situation again here now, where Poland have a handful of nothing. Brawl isn't really any good against Odd Warrior, neither is Warpath, or an Execute can be, but that's about it.
And now this is the moment, I believe, for China where they should start to really capitalize on these slow turns. These slow turns, no taunts are coming down from A8 because...
You love have taunts. If they
decent options, yeah.
If China wants them, there you go. Phantom Militia, just rub it in.
But yeah, as I was saying, you do want to go for fatigue in this matchup, I would imagine, but it's not absolutely crucial. You can just dominate in the mid stages of the game, get yourself into a very beneficial position and whittle their own armor down, because if it does enter a fatigue game state, how much health your opponent is on is also pretty important.
Oh man, Poland might have to go for this Acolyte Warpath. Just because their hand is completely dry otherwise. They don't want to be drawing 3 cards really, for the problems later, but I just think they have to, or at least have to start by drawing the first one and seeing what they get.
But then again, Warpath is not a useless card in this matchup by any stretch of the imagination. Once the quest has been completed, going for quadruple Warpath hero power to clear up the board, guarantee it goes face, could be very, very valuable. You need to make sure you have the ability to actually get the hero powers through to face, because that is one of the main saving graces for China, is that they can just throw down minions like the Phantom Militia to just soak up the hits from the Ragnaros hero power.
Time's running out for Poland to make this decision.
Such a difficult
I
decision.
wonder how much arguing is going on behind the scenes right now. It's important for right now for getting the card draw, but it's so important in terms of the how this game goes to its conclusion as well. They decided against it.
And I think there will be relatively the same discussion that I was having going through Poland's head right now, where they're saying, not only is Warpath a good card later on, but also, what is China actually doing at the moment?
Right.
Like, the fact that we're not playing anything on the board, they're not completely dominating us. Like, they don't have two massive Darius Crowleys on the board, or they're not throwing down giant King Mosh or something crazy like that. They're not actually really doing anything. So I think A8 here is thinking, yes, it's bad that we're not getting our taunts immediately, but it's more bad for us. It's more bad. It's worse for us here if we used up our Warpath, get ourselves further behind on fatigue, and all that other terrible stuff.
However, didn't you say earlier that an early Elise and an early pack is pretty big for the Odd Warrior in this matchup? Getting Zola as well. That'll be 2 packs shuffled into the deck within the next couple turns. And also just a lot of attack damage on the board now.
Absolutely.
We're talking 9 damage every single turn. The Taunt Warrior cannot out-heal that. A8 can't even play Acolyte, then Warpath 3 times, then Execute. That would cost 11 mana.
What now?
I wonder if they have to consider casting the Brawl here.
Yeah, it's not great, but I guess I was saying that, you know, the Odd Warrior can put up a fairly impressive board. They're unlikely to have anything much better than this, I would say. Like, in terms of the big minions left in their deck, it's now stuff like the Direhorn Matriarch towards the top end of the deck. And outside of that, there aren't really that many threats. Azalina, I guess, is about as scary as it gets. But that's not actually a threat in its own right.
There you go, A8 going to just gain some armor instead of taking more damage next turn. Play the Brawl. Elise won the Brawl. That is a disaster for A8 3650. As that was the one target that he really wanted to deal with. I guess he dealt with the Acolyte and prevented one more card draw from China, but I don't think that matters too much, as they're just going to drop down the second Elise. There's now 10 damage on the board again. And again, Poland can deal with it. They can go Slam, Warpath a few times, and then Execute, but that's almost all of their resources.
Well, just 5 Warpaths.
Oh yeah, that's way better.
But they don't want to do that. That's not a good turn here. Like, it clears off any of the really threatening things Yulov and China could actually throw down. But they want to be moving towards their own win condition.
What now?
But then again, having said that, for A8 here, like, what else is he actually supposed to do? If he just goes for Acolyte, double Warpath, Execute is kind of the best outside of that. It's just not that good of a turn. Whereas on one of the following turns, he can either go Acolyte Slam, if he needs to, obviously slamming his own Acolyte to draw 2 cards. Or with this line of play, he could still just draw a Taunt off the top. If you get something like a Tar Creeper, he can just go Tar Creeper into, or Stonehill Defender, something like that. Any kind of cheap Taunt, he can just go double Taunt and equip the Sulfuras.
Ultimately, this is just one card to deal with both of these 5 attack minions, remove 10 damage from the board.
But it's a good card later on.
I know.
And now with Brawl and Warpath both having been used here for Poland, their hero powers are going to be hitting a lot of minions. That's just going to happen at this point.
That's both Warpaths gone as well, not just the first
right.
one. The Odd Warrior doing a pretty good job of just keeping this board dominance. Even with just a couple 2/4s, that's a lot for the Taunt Warrior to deal with.
And then another card you really want a Brawl or a Warpath to go in combination with.
Yeah, or even a Dry Whisker Armorer, one of which has already been used also. Maybe A8's hand is so bad here. They can complete the quest. I guess that's the key, though.
That's true. They can complete the quest. Actually, you know, yeah, the Corner Sentry is fine, isn't it? You go double Taunt, Sulfuros hero power.
Yep.
Yeah. Just start slamming all those taunts through.
Unfortunately, the hero power usually hits a 1-1, which is going to be a little bit frustrating, given that Poland have no way of clearing those up immediately. But finally, A8 has a win condition. Poland can start to try and chip away at that armor. Let's see where this hero power goes. They hero power before they swing, right? Because they prefer the hero power to hit a 2-4 than 1-1. Or do they swing?
Yeah, but you'd much rather it hit face. Ah. Okay, I mean, it worked out for them.
Second best target, it's okay.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I guess this makes sense because you're expecting to get your weapon destroyed here by either Harrison or Ooze. And so leaving up a 2-4 is kind of bad because it's much more likely to draw in a hit from the hero power. But even so, these 1-1s, if they are not traded in here by YouLove, are really blooming annoying. Like, really annoying.
How often does a Taunt Warrior not have a Whirlwind effect in the hand?
Well, fairly often.
I guess
now.
when they've cast both Warpath and a Brawl, then yeah, quite often.
Like, Blood Razor is pretty much the best outcome here for Poland.
A8 is not playing Garrosh anytime soon.
Oh yeah, obviously.
Just throw away the hero power that they've been fighting for this whole game. Ooh. All right, well that's
a pretty nice draw though. As you could even throw in the slam here in this position. But I guess China really need to be, Poland really need to be thinking about the late game scenario here because their hero power, obviously the longer the game goes on, the better it is for them at this point. Like if they never took fatigue, they'd win every time here. Because eventually the hero power will just swing things in their favor. It's just better at the moment.
Yeah.
And so clearly here they're saving the slam to potentially not draw at any point. They may have just given up on the draw plan at this point, which is very valid. But the downside then is, in the immediate, their turns are a lot less powerful because they have less cards in hand, quite simply. But I guess they're thinking if we draw 2 more many cards, it doesn't matter how good our turns are in the immediate because we eventually just lose.
Yeah.
What now?
Whereas, as you were saying, without fatigue, I mean, this was sort of part of the point of Taunt Warrior is that it's a very anti-control deck. It has this inevitable win condition, not quite as strong as the Shadowwalk Shaman does, but yeah, eventually it wins the game. It's not like YouLove is going to be putting down loads of threats that actually threaten A83650. However, there are 2 Ungoro packs somewhere.
There are 2 Ungoro
in that 11-card deck. Curiously, and that can mean cards like Tyrantus.
And now is a point where I want to bring up something I didn't mention at the time, because you know, there was so much other stuff to talk about, which is the Faceless Manipulator that we see in hand for China. They have had multiple opportunities where it was playable on pretty good minions, actually. We could have seen it on the Gem-Studded Golem as the main point I saw earlier on, where there was a play of Faceless Manipulatoring the Gem-Studded Golem, play the Rabid Worgen, and take out the opposing Worgen with both your Gorehowl and the Rabid Worgen. China opted not to go for that. I can't remember what else they played instead of the Faceless Manipulator, but basically they didn't try and seize board control in what was probably the biggest minion that's ever going to be played for that game.
Right.
So I guess unless they're saving it for exactly Direhorn Matriarch, I kind of have to question what their thinking is with that card. Why do they want to save it so heavily?
Or again, anything from one of the Ungoro packs. Like, there are actually quite a few possibilities there.
That's true.
They usually get a legendary minion, and there aren't actually that many Ungoro legendaries that aren't quests. So, you know, the chances of getting another release, or a Tyrantus, or one of the big, or King Mosh, Swamp King Dread, something like that.
Even then, most of those cards aren't that much bigger than a Gem-Studded Golem, though.
No, that's true. That's true.
Like, I agree, Tyrantus or Ultrasaur or something absurd like that would be pretty nice.
Baku the Moon Eater.
Right.
Baku the Patches.
I mean, you can't really call it patches in this scenario when literally every card in the deck is going to be drawn. But yeah, I will agree with you. It's not particularly good in this matchup. Not because of the fact that it's a dead card, but because you can't play hero power along with it. And you really want to be spamming that hero power every single turn. But having said that, what does YouLove actually do outside of that? The weapon now doesn't take out any of these little guys. Reckless Flurry is obviously uncastable.
No way they play that card. Wow, Owl into Brawl. That's both silences removed.
Yeah, It is both silencers removed, but the efficacy of silence in this matchup is very low indeed.
Yeah, true.
But the efficacy of having any minion on board in this matchup, or the importance, I should say, sorry, is very high indeed. You just want to have anything that can soak up hits from the hero power at all. And here, A8 with the Taunt Warrior, just very, very happy indeed to line up directly those die insect hero powers directly to the enemy's face.
Had the opportunity to use the Acolyte and both Blood Razors to draw 2 more cards, but obviously that's not part of the game plan this game, as we've talked about quite a lot. Let's see what China got there.
Oh!
They got King Marsh.
But they got Explore and Goro! Oh!
Don't get excited about that.
The memes could beginneth.
Is that?
It's something to consider at a later
than...
date. Like, getting the Elise pack, the second Elise pack, is probably better. But what have you actually got left in your deck as the Odd Warrior? Like, a Fiery War Axe, a Shield Slam's been drawn, Azalina, Harrison. Like, these are not great cards.
Yeah, Azalina's no good against Taunt Warrior.
Yeah,
so.
you want your hand. Your hand's a million times better than your opponent's. I mean, I have to be honest, I'm more hoping to see it played than actually expecting to see Explorer and Goro played.
I'm relatively excited about the Hydrologist as well. Having to play around the Paladin Secrets. I guess it depends which secret they get, but something like...
I haven't had to play around Paladin Secrets in so long now.
They're not going to want the card draw one. Noble Sacrifice probably not going to do anything. Redemption not going to do anything. Eye for an Eye is basically deal 8 damage a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's not that bad.
Not sure how impactful 8 damage is, but I guess for 3 mana, like a 2/2 and deal 8 damage. That's...
Getaway Coda would have been really good.
Oh, yeah. I almost said, yeah. Getaway Coda, and then realized, nope. Last time secrets were relevant, maybe, but right now, nope.
As you know, we've been talking about the explosive excitement of the Ongoro pack, but for A8 here, a very interesting turn indeed, where there are a multitude of options as to how he deals with this. If he's expecting this to be the biggest minion he sees for a while, then attack phase execute is a pretty nice play indeed. But I think I like the recognition that even if it was all rubbish minions from the pack, there's still bigger minions you need to worry about. There's Baku, there's the Direhorn Matriarch, and there's very likely a big minion off of the pack as well.
Right.
So execute is still a very key card here.
Yeah, more big taunts from Stonehill defenders. There's definitely other targets for Faceless Manipulator. I still don't disagree with what you were saying before, though. Like, when there's actually something there to cast it on,
yeah,
it just makes sense to cast the Faceless Manipulator.
Now?
For now, though, the problem with King Marsh is the same as the problem with Baku, which is that it costs 9 mana.
Yeah.
Trying to want to armor up every turn. Unpowered Steambolt's not too bad. Eats up the 8 damage from the hero power and survives.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, maybe it is actually the pick. The more I look at it, the more I think so. Just anything that stalls out the game here.
Yeah. Obviously there's a Blood Razor, which means the weapon can go in first, but still, that's taking...
It's a full hit.
Yeah, it's taking up an extra attack and the hero power. Again, Getaway Coda would be absurd.
Yeah, Hidden Wisdom obviously not going to be the pick. And even just resurrecting a minion on 1 life, if it draws out 8 damage, job done. Yeah. That is a fantastic card you've got off of the Hydrologist.
More card draw, that's not what Poland wants right now. I guess to just drop the Tar Lord and smack that hero power button. Do they have to do anything specific to play around secrets? Maybe they hit in with the Stonehill defender?
Yeah, like they can get rid of the Noble Sacrifice, potentially. And it's kind of good to get attacking in anyway, because you'd much rather have no minions on board at all. Like, your minions are not that valuable to have, but it's very valuable to remove their minions completely. So sacrificing off your own minions is definitely something you'd like to do this game.
What now?
I'm biased because I can see Poland's hand, but I was wondering about the Repentance when they had the choice with the Hydrologist. Obviously, Redemption makes a lot of sense because of that hero power.
Yeah, I guess they are afraid of Repentance. And that's why it makes sense for me to go for the hero power first, because then obviously you can get rid of exactly Redemption. And if that didn't activate, you could attack in to try and get rid of the Noble Sacrifice as well. This feels like very good ordering here from A8. There's now
Goal.
another Gorehal being picked up. Still plenty of removal for China, so it's really not the minions that are the threats here for China at all. It's just that hero power, which is attacking through so powerfully, so consistently. But even then, China have been able to deny those hero powers going to face a fair amount, and they're still well above 30 health.
Is Tarlord a potential faceless manipulator target? Again, just to put an 11 health minion on the board, eat up several attacks?
Yeah, it's not bad, is it? You could then take out the Stonehill Defender as well, but the thing is, you don't actually have any way to really deal with the Tarlord at the moment. So setting up the Gorehowl to go for Tidal Surge Gorehowl on a following turn for the exact amount of damage to take it out feels like something you kind of want to be moving towards. But actually, having said that, do you need to kill off the Tarlord? It's only dealing 1 damage a turn, which is really not that bad.
It's just going to be a Baku turn. So my next question, Derek, is would Yulov prefer the hero power to kill Baku, or would Yulov prefer the hero power to go face?
I think you prefer the hero power to go face. Like, you can kill off with Execute at some point. I mean, we'll very likely see an Execute here.
To be clear, A8 wants this to go face, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Like, he just wants to kill his opponent. That's all that really matters. It seems unlikely that China are going to get into a position where they spiral board control so drastically because you missed the shot on Baku.
That Export and Goro is still sitting there in China's hand. Obviously, the second pack is still in the deck, so that in itself makes Export and Goro unplayable.
I mean, I do doubt it's going to be played. I have to be perfectly honest. And again, for those of you who maybe don't know, it does turn all of the cards remaining in your deck into a 1-mana card that just says, discover a card. Yep. It's truly the stuff of meme legends.
A8's hand is removal, card draw. Dealt with the minions, so now I guess playing anything else is meaningless.
And I guess here for AA and Poland, even hitting the minion here, when I look at it, isn't necessarily that bad, because while I did say the Execute obviously could deal with it here, he knows that there are more threats in the deck. He knows that there is still, at absolute minimum, even ignoring what the pack will deliver, a Daihon Matriarch and a Faceless.
Yep. Here's the Faceless on the Tarlord, as we were saying earlier. And the Execute probably going to find its target here. Then again, yeah, it is, because it's in the way of the hero power. It's got nothing to do with board control whatsoever. It's just, you've been talking about it all game. It's just that China need to have something on the board, and Poland need for China to not have something on the board.
And I wonder if Poland will attack in here to clear it off, because taking 5 damage here is not nothing at all. They basically have no armor gain left, because they don't want to play the shield block in order to draw a card. And therefore, the fatigue damage is going to start stacking up very rapidly indeed. Very rapidly indeed. So maybe attacking him with the Tarlord into the opposing Tarlord and then executing is going to be their game plan. And I think I like this a bit more. Like, 5 health on yourself is more valuable than 5 health on the Tarlord at this point.
When it comes to fatigue, though, they're even at the moment. Both players have 5 cards left on the deck, and I'm thinking back to turn 1 when China silenced Poland's Acolyte Pain, prevented any of the card draws. Obviously, Poland would have had more choices throughout the game. They would have completed the quest faster, etc. And that's a lot to think about.
Like, how much damage are they going to deal to their opponent by drawing them 1 extra card? Versus how much health did they save by denying the opponent's quest by, what, 3-4 turns? Like, that's absolutely insane. But now here, obviously the perfect time for King Mosh to come down, as they are running very low indeed on activators in order to actually set off the King Moshes. They're not even running Whirlwind in this deck, so that was pretty much the only time they were going to get for a powerful King Mosh, and a powerful King Mosh it be.
It's a reasonable threat, unless Poland can deal with it with the hero power, which again, they don't even know if that's what they want to do. Then again, they can put a lot of taunts in the way. So King Mosh not going to cause a lot of damage immediately, but definitely something A8 would not like to have to deal with.
And this is not like some of the other global games we've seen with Taunt Warrior, where, who was it? Was it Brazil, where they were hitting, their opponents were just missing every single time, hitting the totem every single game.
That's a face hit.
which was obviously dreadful. In this instance, like if you hit Baku with the hero power, yeah, fine, you've killed a 7-8. If you hit King Mosh, great, you've killed a 9-7.
Right, now I'm really curious though, because so that went face. China have 1 armor remaining. If A8 now decide to go Silent Chain Gang or double Phantom Militia, Yulov could potentially armor up
And then go
Reckless Flurry and hit the face with his King Mosh. Not something that
And
we
also play Direhorn Matriarch. Like, you
Yeah.
can make some big old plays onto the board this turn. This is a real power turn for Yulov.
he's going to want to be emptying his hand for sure.
That's true.
Play this other pack. It's not the kind of thing you'd expect to happen, Reckless
Yes.
Flurry for this, but to push 9 damage to the face.
It's just so almost so good, because I agree, 9 damage to the face is huge here. It's very, very important indeed at this point. Like, I was saying how important it was for Poland to push damage to their opponent's face. It's now becoming more and more important to deny it from their opponent as well. As with the pack being drawn, Yulov and China throw down Explore on Goro. It's only 3 cards left, but who even knows what nonsense could occur from here on in?
Well, they just take the biggest thing, whatever they're offered every single turn, don't they?
Probably.
Garrosh is about as dead as a draw can possibly be. Again, playing the Death Knight hero card would cause Poland to lose their hero power that they got from the quest, and that's the only way they win the game. So Garrosh will be sitting in the hand. It can be used as 4 extra burst damage for lethal later on to equip the weapon after a hero power has been used, but that's about it.
And it just seems crazy to me that A8 has gotten himself into this situation where he's really, like, they're even on fatigue damage at this point. And there were multiple points where A8 just stopped drawing. That Acolyte of Pain has been in his hand for so long at this point. His own Acolyte of Pain was silenced by his opponent. And still, China, having drawn a whole bunch of cards, because of all that shuffle they got into their deck, 3 extra cards with Direhorn and 2 packs. I just find it staggering that China are still in such a good position.
Definitely a little bit closer than we gave this matchup credit for when we were originally hypothesizing. I don't know why I was wondering what the card was going to be that gets drawn there. Just choose your path.
Yeah.
I wonder if he plays it.
So what else is he going to be doing on this turn? It's looking like it could very possibly be Gorehowl Hero Power Choose Your Path as like a basic look at the turn. It could also be Hero Power into the Reckless Flurry to push some extra damage through to face. Also pretty decent, but then obviously you're leaving yourself very vulnerable indeed to Weapon Swing and Hero Power, so that's probably not the time to go for that. Whoa! We're letting rip with the Choose Your Path.
Black Cow Gunspire.
Oh, these are some cards.
Yeah.
So Molten Blade is like the weirdest one, and he probably won't pick that because of the fact you still have Gorehowl in hand. Dry Whisker Armor definitely feels like the way to go. A whole bunch of armor being gained in the immediate is very valuable indeed.
I guess we're not taking the biggest thing then, but as you said, just 2 mana gain 6 armor. Looks pretty good. As we heard from Furianta, that the further into this game we go, the more favored China should be in theory. Marsh is doing some serious work.
Yeah, it is, but at the same time there, I do find it surprising that we saw the less mana efficient play and the play that seems to be, in my opinion, more vulnerable to Brawl, of not going for the Gorehowl. Like, at any point in this game, if China want to play Gorehowl, they want to do it as soon as possible to get as much value out of it as they possibly can before the game ends. Having said that, however, there's a very good chance here that Gorehowl is only used right at the end of the game for just 7 damage to face. Like, China don't want to take any damage from minions with it whatsoever, and they're instead relying on this unpowered Steambot to soak up all the damage instead.
Meanwhile, on the other side of things, A83650 doesn't really have much he can do at all. I guess he could consider casting the Brawl. He knows there's still another Ngoro pack somewhere in the deck or hand, though, which means 5 more potential threats they have to play around, plus 2 more Choose Your Path cards, which could be literally anything.
Right.
It's very difficult for Poland to know what to play around here. So he finally deals with King Mosh, but isn't pushing any more damage to the face.
And it's starting to get a little bit scary here for Poland as they enter the fatigue state of the game. And their hand is absolutely dire. Shield Block uncastable, Acolyte uncastable, Scourge Lord Garrosh uncastable. As for Yulov, some slightly less impressive options here. Reckless Flurry, probably not what he's looking at. Arcanite Reaper.
The problem is he's got Gorehowl though. It is deal 10 damage though. I was wondering about the Sabertooth just because it's got stealth, which means it almost guarantees it's going to soak up a hero power at some point. Or it's 6 damage to the face, or 8 damage to the face at some point.
Sure.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think I like this the most.
It seems to have more rewards than the Arcanite Reaper does.
That's also, I mean, it does literally nothing at this point for A8, which is the best case scenario for him. If it draws any cards whatsoever, that's absolutely dreadful.
Yep, start with the hero power.
Hey, there we go. Finally one through to the face.
Both players tied up at 34 health as China enter fatigue.
The final choose your path.
Oh.
Yeah, pretty underwhelming. But, I mean, mounted fire armor
is great, actually.
pretty good, yeah. You put it onto the board. If your opponent remove it, great. You get yourself 7 armor or 6 armor. If they don't remove it, then you're hitting them for 4 every turn.
And it's not like A8 can choose where the hero power goes either.
Right,
At some point, his hero power, which should be deal 8 damage to the enemy's face, will be restore 6 health to the enemy hero.
And now this is the point where, similarly to one of the clips that we showed in our top 5 highlight from last week, Yulov should have, and China should have, perfect information about what their opponent's hand is now after this last card is drawn. No random generation has occurred in terms of cards. So they should have the exact information about what they need to play around, which is basically just Brawl. That's the main thing they need to consider here. There's obviously a few other removal options, but now Shield Slam can't even do anything unless A8 wants to play Shield Block or Scourge Lord Garrosh, one of which gets them a tick closer to fatigue, one of which literally loses them the game on the spot if they play it.
It's actually unbelievable how dead A8's hand is. Acolyte, unplayable. Shield Block, unplayable. Brawl deals with 2 minions. And, well, everything else is unplayable. Literally, Brawl is the only playable card for Poland. Well, Poland can play the Shield Slam, but it just won't do anything. China actually about to take this one down. It doesn't look like Poland have any way of getting back onto the board.
Certainly looks that way. I mean, when I was talking to Fury Hunter about it, this is what he was saying. If you can slow down the quest as the odd warrior, getting those hero powers every single turn, and a nice couple of Ungoro packs come in there as well. A8's just in that position that Taunt Warrior so often finds itself in my opinion now, where you just can't dictate heavily enough where those hero powers go, even with the addition of Warpath here. Because of those mid-game skirmishes where China was able to develop a scary enough board through the likes of Elise Trailblazer and the Darius Crowley, too many resources had to be committed to just clearing off the board. Which means at this point, nothing's going face.
Things are about to get real bad for Poland. They knew this pack was coming. Volcanosaur, Frozen Crusher.
Oh, Calamos is sick as well.
Calamos with Frozen Crusher in hand to proc it. That's insane.
This is such a good pack. Oh my lord. Like just 4 big boys that you can just throw down onto the board. And 4 of the biggest boys in Ungoro, dare I say.
And a little poisonous dude. It's not going to be
well, I mean, he literally has giant in his name. The giant wasp.
Yeah, my
for a wasp, it's big.
My apologies.
For a Calamos, it's small.
Are there larger Calamos?
Well, no. A wasp compared to a Calamos is rather small. Although, actually, having said that, I have no idea how big Calamos actually is in stature. It could be like 1 foot tall, and I would have no idea.
Yeah, these cards aren't to scale, you know.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean.
Looks like Tunisia just took their first game against Switzerland in the off-stream match. Their Swiss score is 1-1, so this isn't as vital for them as it was for Croatia, Japan, Hungary, and Malaysia. They will be eliminated for losing, but that's going on at the same time.
As here, entering the final stages of the game, Poland taking an absolute beating. Fatigue is hitting them hard, and the saber-toothed tiger is hitting them even harder. And even though they're getting all these hits through to face, it's just not going to make any difference at this point. You Love China has too much armor gain, too many threats to throw down as well.
A very careful game played by both sides, trying to not draw more cards than they needed to. Yes, Love drew a few times off of the Town Crier, prevented H drawing the early game to prevent that quest from being completed. This has just been very well played by China, and we've seen how it's paid off. Not a great matchup for them, a winnable matchup, and well, win it they did.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even though the one thing that was debatable about their play, which was obviously drawing so many cards throughout the series of the game off the Acolytes of Pain, their shield blocks, things like that, it feels like they'd mathed it out very well indeed. Like, they knew that they were going to shuffle 3 cards into their deck because they were saving Zola for exactly the Elise Trailblazer. And even after that, they were just in a position where they evened it out, made it equal on fatigue, and basically forced their opponents to not draw, even though they were drawing so much.
Yeah. Value, value, value is what that game came down to, until eventually the Odd Warrior very definitively outvalued the Taunt Warrior. There was no way the Taunt Warrior was keeping up with that. But next, we have, for Poland, Miracle Rogue. Oh, that's, yeah, for Poland, yes. Miracle Rogue. On my notes, the teams are the other way around, and that just confused me for a second there. For Poland, Miracle Rogue. For China, Shadowwalk Shaman. Derek, you are the Miracle Rogue expert amongst...
Please don't call me that.
Amongst Hearthstone casters. The best Miracle Rogue player in the world.
In the world, yep, definitively.
Of Hearthstone casters, which doesn't really set the bar very high. But what do you think of this matchup?
I just really like this matchup as the Miracle Rogue. Yeah, it's far from a foregone victory right at the start, but just with the way the deck works for Shadowwalk Shaman is they can't consistently enough clear off everything you're playing. Right. Because usually as the Shadowwalk Shaman, you wait for them to build up a little bit and then you Volcano. They build up a little bit more and you Lightning Storm. Yep. But against Rogue, that's not a viable plan, because as soon as you leave up one Henge Clan Thug, one Faldori Strider, they stick Cold Blood on it and you're dead. Yep. Like, you just have to clear off everything against the Rogue to have any kind of a chance. Or alternatively, with the more consistent game plan for the Shadowwalk Shaman, you have to dominate the board, which basically can happen for China because they're running the Keleseth variant, which I like a lot more against the Miracle Rogue, because you can go Keleseth into Chain Gang, into all that nonsense. That's basically how you're winning this match.
Just defend yourself as quickly as possible. It is a truly terrifying concept, just quite how much burst Miracle Rogue is potentially coming up with. I mean, it's why Miracle Rogue can do so well against the Control Mage or Big Spell Mage, because just stick 1/4/4 and then suddenly Leroy, Cold Blood, Eviscerate, Cold Blood, Prep, Eviscerate, and it's just stupid amounts of damage can come out of nowhere.
It can indeed. And even if you ignore the early game scenarios for Rogue, if we get into the super late game scenarios, or at least the super late game for Rogue, which is probably only like turn 15 or something, or earlier even, and they've drawn their whole deck, exactly. In that scenario where they have 6 spiders on the board, the Shaman cannot do anything about that. Right. Double Volcano is often not enough to even clear it off when you have an Edwin on there or something else as well. It's just too much damage coming through, and they will probably have to have used all their removal earlier on in the game anyway, so it has to be dominance of the board early on, or an incredibly early Shadowwalk to really have much of a chance.
Yeah. The other thing, though, worth mentioning now, of course, China's Shadowwalk Shaman is not the standard Shadowwalk Shaman.
That's a good point.
So how...
Oh, no, wait, they're not playing the Keleseth version, are they?
No, sorry, it must have been the Poland one. But how did Doomsayers factor into this matchup?
Okay, so taking another look at this, as I was saying, with the Keleseth variant is your plan A. This variant doesn't really help you all too much against Rogue, I would say. Like, Doomsayer usually is just going to be buying you a turn rather than killing off any minions, because you throw it down on turn 2, they can't play Henge Clan Thug. It's basically the main thing you're going for in the early game. And then obviously in the later stages, you can go for Volcano into Doomsayer to try and swing back board control in your favor afterwards. Sure. But it's just not the build you want against Miracle Rogue. As I said, you want to curve out and try and beat them on board, even though it's a very, very tall order.
Yeah, there's not really any way that Murmuring Elemental can help either. It's not like there's any battle cry that... I guess Murmuring Elemental is a Hagatha.
Yeah, that's the combo.
That's one turn, clear the board.
Yeah, which is very powerful. Like, that is worth saying. But again, it's just not your primary win condition. But having said that, pre-mulligan for a 3-6-50, not the hand you're looking for whatsoever. I've had a couple of interesting discussions about backstab in this matchup, because Obviously, it's not primarily what you're looking for. You want Hench Clan Thug and you want Faldori Strider pretty much as the main options, and Cold Blood is not bad at the start either. But in order to deal with a Manatide Totem, or kind of an Acolyte of Pain, but mainly a Manatide, a Backstab can be not that bad if you already have a couple of the other decent options, like Hench Clan Thug and Strider. But I think considering there are no other good cards in their hand, probably a full mulligan coming in here from Poland.
Again, I'm just glancing at the rest of the series coming up. Now that China, again, won that game, they had to win the Odd Glory game because both of the remaining matchups are favoured for Poland. And so still a hard series for them, as Poland could just win the next 2 games in a row.
And with that hand, very likely will win the next game here. As we cannot overstate, as you mentioned back to the last game, how important it was for China to win it. They would just be basically unable to win the series, or so unfavoured if Poland were 2-1 up here. But now, in this instance, Poland looking to be in a great spot to get things rolling.
On the other side of things, China do have Saronite Chain Gang, I guess, potentially Murmuring Elemental into Saronite Chain Gang. It's a few turns away, and it does give A8 the chance to have this dominating start first with Hench Clans, but he will get some taunts at some point as Lee just plays a 1-1. Let's go!
And you talk about dominating starts with Hench Clans, because obviously the game plan here is you go Dagger into Hench Clan, which is very, very powerful indeed. China has the perfect disruption as that. There's nothing I find so unsatisfying in Hearthstone as having your dagger oozed on turn 3 from your opponent.
When you have a Hench Clan.
Exactly, you're just like, oh, I was going to eat my Hench Clan, you took my knives and you got them all gloopy and now they're broken. It just feels awful. But
You were going to eat your Hench Clan?
no, you got the knives all gloopy.
Oh, okay. Oh, your Hench Clan was going to eat. No?
We talk about eating.
I thought you said I was going to eat my Hench Clan and my knives got all gloopy.
Did I say eat? I meant to say play my Hench Clan. Maybe I did. I am a bit hungry. Gotta be honest here. But Poland's making a good hedge around that play by getting one swing with the dagger gone for straight away, but still here for China and Lee. I love just throwing down the ooze anyway. It's never going to get much better than this. And as I said, this is about trying to dominate the board early on. And a 3-mana 3/3 really is not that bad, as well as obviously the primary reason being that you deny that all-important Thug.
Now, though, to counteract this play, would it be correct for Poland to just go ahead and play Faldori Strider and start getting those 4/4s rolling?
So I like the thinking there of just going for Strider as quick as you can, because with Miracle Rogue, like, the point of the deck now is you just play your best thing as early as you can. Like, Coin Minstrel is obviously so much weaker in terms of stats, and if you didn't have a Strider already, I would much prefer that play of going Coin Minstrel. But I think outside of both of those plays, the SI7 is not that bad here.
Okay.
If you're leading into a turn 4 from your opponent and you go Coin Strider, you can obviously make a nice value trade, but they're very possibly playing Hench Clan Thug, against which the Elven Minstrel is terrible. So I don't mind playing the 3/3 here and then just following up with the Strider, because saving the coin for draw later on with the Elven Minstrel feels very good indeed.
Welcome to my web.
It would have worked out relatively similarly if he'd gone for Coin Strider instead.
Yep.
But this way you still have the coin, which, as we can see with this hand, is going to be tremendously powerful.
Now, especially as a result of that Glossanos Ooze play, China haven't fallen too behind in the early game. Getting a 5-mana Hagatha as well means turn 7.
Wow.
They have almost a guaranteed board clear unless there's a huge Edwin. That's about as good as a start and as good as a Farsight as Lee could get, right?
This is very respectable indeed. Or maybe it doesn't even have to be Murmuring Elemental into Hagatha. Like, we could just see Hagatha coming down on one of the coming turns if A8 makes a decent play onto the board here.
Yeah, the Faldori Strider is probably trading with one of these 2/3s, so Hagatha alone would finish the job there. Poland's hand is full of options, but none of them are looking that incredible at the moment. Hench Clan plus Eviscerate maybe is the best thing there, but they're not buffing the Hench Clan, feels a little bit bad.
So many options.
So then you're leaving yourself vulnerable to Lightning Storm, obviously.
5-mana Hagatha as well.
Yeah. In the real world, where Hearthstone makes sense, you're leaving yourself vulnerable to Lightning Storm, at which point maybe you should consider Coin Abyss Elven Minstrel instead, because yes, you are then leaving yourself open to the Saronite Chain Gang trade, but they're going to trade that Chain Gang into the remainder of the Faldery Strider anyway.
Who goes there?
And this is a stronger play in the immediate, obviously only leaving yourself vulnerable to Lightning Storm 50% of the time rather than 100% of the time. Does make a good amount of sense. But even then, like, leaning into a more powerful play on one of the following turns, trying to play that second Strider as quickly as you possibly can, or leading into on the following turn a 6-6 Edwin, both felt pretty respectable. But I guess this now gives you the potential follow-up on the next turn of Hench Clan Dagger Coldblood if they don't clear this off, which is a really devastatingly powerful play.
I can't stop staring at that Hagatha, Derek. They must be considering it this turn.
Yeah.
Like, Hagatha into Glacial Shard, start getting the spells, freeze the face. What are the other options here? Manatide Tome to what? Freeze the Hench Clan? It's not looking too great.
It's just because Murmuring Elemental into Hagatha is so good later on. Like, once you're facing down a board of 4/4s, that's your trump card, because not only is it a powerful play, it's a powerful play your enemy might not expect, which are some of the most powerful plays in Hearthstone. But even so, China do throw it down here. The benefits obviously include you take less damage now, you still have Lightning Storm into Volcano later on, and the earlier you play Hagatha, the more likely you are to find those key extra spells to help you clear off the board later on.
More storms, more volcanoes, more healing rains. Basically more copies of everything they already have in their hand right now.
That would be the best. More copies of cards you put in your deck. It's interesting how those are the good ones.
Yeah, funny that.
So
Second
many
Coldblood picked
options.
up by A83650 though. There's a lot that he can do over the next few turns. If he can just get one minion to stick.
Yeah, and that's the thing. He just needs to get one minion to stick, which is going to get easier and easier, I would say. Well, actually not easier and easier. In the next couple of turns is probably his best chance, I would say, because obviously early on, Chain Gang and the Gluttonous Ooze made that very difficult, but now, as China is starting to run out of minions, Poland has the best chance of sticking some kind of a board before the real power plays start to come down with Grumble and Shudderbock.
The fact that A8 is running Leroy and Shadow Step is a little bit dodgy for Lee as well. Obviously on 35 health he's fine, but he's going to want to be keeping his health total as high as possible to play around Leroy's with Shadow Steps, with Coldbloods.
And Spirit Echoes is potentially a pretty good card here.
Great with Glacial Shard, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Very good with Glacial Shard. Well, you could just go for it on this turn.
Yeah. It's just more value, isn't it? The cards return to the hand, get played again later, more spells get added to the hand.
Perplexing.
The only potential issue with Hagatha is adding lots of bad, expensive spells which clog up the hand and can't be played, like that one.
That's less good, I will agree. Do you know what would be really good for Lee right now?
What?
Omega Mind from the next expansion. Do you remember that one? The 2-mana 2/3.
The little mini Halcyon?
Yeah, exactly. It gives your spells a lifesteal if you have 10 or more mana. That would be really good here with Lightning Storm and Volcano.
Yeah, come turn 10, it would be incredible.
I can't wait for the next week of the Global Games. It's going to be so much fun with the new expansion.
I know, it's a shame that we don't start until a couple weeks after it's come out again, but HCT Germany is going to be a fantastic event.
So now we're both sat here thinking, what is the best play here for A8 to maximize damage he's pushing forward now? Because as the game starts to extend, Hagatha's down, Manatide's down. Lee is starting to do some pretty disgusting things in this matchup, which you really don't want to let happen.
Speaking of disgusting things.
Yeah, and Poland here going for a play that I find very interesting and I think I like. I've talked to Sottle about this when we were both talking about this matchup, where I disrespect Manatide Totem a lot more than he does. Like, I'm often very happy to leave it up, as we do see Indonesia equalize up against Switzerland in the off-stream match. But I would be more likely to make this kind of play than I believe Sottle would, as he is much more happy with killing it off, because he knows what disgusting things Manatide can do if you leave it up. But I think I like it from A8, demanding an answer from his opponent, and to an extent, using the Manatide Totem as an umbrella against Volcano, potentially at a later date.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Certainly as China are filling up their hands with Hagatha spells anyway, I wouldn't say it's too important to deal with the Manatide at all in this situation specifically. as China just going to try and guarantee that this Doomsayer goes off. And there is the Valspine Slayer. There's now a Sap as well. Oh, okay. I guess now Auctioneer, Sap, Prep, go.
Ooh. That's a pretty good turn. You've obviously only got one set of spiders in the deck, but you haven't found a single one of those 3 ambushes yet.
Edwin as well.
And
Prep.
you can just draw so much of your deck here. This is absolutely devastatingly powerful as long as any kind of a decent spell is picked up here.
Prep, Sap, Prep, Sap.
Perfect.
Edwin would be a pretty good way to go here. There's
And
no Hex in the hand.
You just kill the next card that you sap as well because it's a full hand for China. So you need to think about what do you actually want to get rid of here. Like, killing off the Glacial Shard is okay, but Sap could be a very good card at a later date.
Yeah, actually filling up the hand is probably more valuable. As the Fan of Knives gets picked up, that's 2 more draws. Is Edwin going to be one of them? No, but he can backstab his own Auctioneer if he wants to dig for it.
Oh, he really, really wants to play Edwin on this turn.
Yeah, it's as good as Edwin's ever going to get.
You've seen Hagatha, you've seen the single copy of Lightning Storm, so putting your Auctioneer down to 2 health is not that bad.
No!
Oh.
Why did he play the Flame Elemental? Why? Why A8? Why?
That would have been like a 12-12 or something on this turn. Maybe even more.
Bigger. I think bigger, actually.
As there was also, we should point out, the chance there for a burn on either Grumble or Shudderwork or a Saronite Chain Gang. Like, a lot of the best cards, or the key cards of the combo, could have been burned there. Now with the Manatide still left up, maybe it forces Lee and China to just go for a Volcano to clear up everything here.
Okay, so not playing all into Edwin is playing around Hex, I guess, to an extent, but still, that turn...
Well, if they'd had Edwin, they would have played it there, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, but not going all in, like not backstabbing
Right.
the Auctioneer in order to get there. But that sequence of events has hurt me a little bit. I just need to take a look.
I guess it does leave you way less vulnerable to any kind of Wild Pyro plays. Like, if you were met with Wild Pyro, Earthshock, Healing Rain,
right,
you're in such a bad spot then. Whereas this Auctioneer is way, way more difficult to deal with now.
And then they can still go, like, Firefly, Flame Elemental, Cold Blood, Hedge Clan, Edwin at some point. 3 overloaded crystals next turn actually makes a big difference here.
Ooh, another copy of Lightning Storm being picked up could be a very big deal indeed. As obviously Wild Pyro into Lightning Storm could deal with some of these spiders that are inevitably going to start hitting the board, as with only 9 cards left in the deck for Poland, almost a third of their deck, or sorry, almost a quarter of their deck is spiders.
And one of the cards in the deck still remaining is the second Faldori
Very
Shred,
true.
right? So which will just allow for even more spiders later on. They will be coming in very quick succession.
I wonder.
So these minions have Death Rattle turn into a random basic totem, which isn't great for China, but could be a bit annoying for Poland if Taunt Totems start appearing.
The weird thing here for Poland is, although that China's minions have Death Rattle, it's kind of good for Poland if they return back to hand, because then you start to run into major hand size issues.
Yeah.
As still in this scenario, while A8 is going on with the main game plan of developing a board, attacking minions to phase, Overdraw is a very relevant thing
Bye,
here.
Shadowwalk.
Lee could just burn Shadowwalk here. It's not that unlikely. Or Grumble.
Yeah, or Grumble or Saronite or something. I guess the Saronite's already been played, so that's not as big a deal, but...
Let's see if Lee has any reaction on his face. Oh, nothing. Cold as ice.
It was only a Healing Rain. He wouldn't react to that. It's fine. There's still a Healing Rain there from earlier. However, this board state does warrant some sort of reaction. Lightning Storm plus Volcano is 1 mana too expensive this turn.
What do you do outside of that? Like, how much health is even on board here? It's 12, 14, 18, 20 health on board.
So Volcano, assume that the Edwin is the only minion that survives and then freeze it, is one option. As obviously mathematically, the minion that has the most health is by far the most likely to survive. It's going to be close though. Like, there's a solid chance that the Hedge Clan or the Spider lives as well. That's the issue.
Oh wait, Edwin can't be the only minion that survives though. Right, oh no, it could
Yeah,
be.
it
There's
could be.
14, oh sorry, no, there's, okay, 12 health with the rest
Yeah.
of them. Yeah, very optimistic indeed.
Yeah.
As yeah, Wild Pyro, Lightning Storm, Glacial Shard is probably more likely to work out in your favor.
The issue is those 4/4s can survive.
And still, hand size issues continue to be a major concern here for Lee. he cannot kill off that Manatite token. And look at the benefits that A8 has been reaping by getting that Cold Blood through to face and leaving it up, even despite the fact that Lee gets a pretty perfect roll on the Lightning Storm there.
Well, Lee even then chose to sacrifice the Glacial Shard, because he could have had the Glacial Shard stick to the board after this. He decided it'd be better off dead than on his side of the board. I'm not sure what that plays around, though, thinking about it.
Yeah.
Why would he not want a 2-1 on the board?
Spirit Echoes, because he doesn't want another card returning to hand.
I guess.
But, yeah. Yeah, I think that was probably a slight mistake.
As he consciously played the
because he could have got Crushing Hands off the top or something.
Right. Oh, okay, yeah.
Whereas, sorry, after the... oh, no, sorry, because he wouldn't have played another minion. My mistake.
Right, so he played the Shard first
Yeah.
to see what he gets and then play the... Yeah, okay, that makes sense. We got that.
Yeah, that's right, because he could have got a Hex or something.
And it is a Taunt Totem. That's pretty annoying. Spine Slayer, you want to you gonna deal with that?
There once
Okay,
was a
Thundery
man.
Strider. Certain to be drawn here. As it's the only minion left in the deck. Okay.
Yeah. As Grumble is burned off the top for Lee.
Hang on a sec. How important is that, though, in this matchup? Because Rogue is going to be out of cards anyway. All that the Shaman has to do is survive.
Yeah, but how do they do that? Like, what happens here? We see 5 spiders left in the deck still.
Yeah, that's an issue.
Like, you just go Faltore Strider and draw your entire deck. They only have 1 Volcano here. They've used 2 Lightning Storms, the one that was in their deck and the one that wasn't. Their only real out here, I think, is to get another Volcano off the top.
And a single Shadow Walk is only 3 damage to all minions, which means that all survive with the 4 health.
Yeah, and you can't go
Murmuring
into Shadow Walk
because
anymore.
Grumble's been burnt.
Yes. And so now for Lee, it's about trying to find ways that he can dominate the board through Hagatha spells, which obviously there is some way of doing so. Like, you can make a very impressive board here through the use of Feral Spirits, Spirit Echoes, stuff like that, or you can at the very least generate a huge amount of spells. But I just wonder if that's going to be enough. Like, you don't have a win condition anymore. You just have to hope that when you draw your Shudderwock and play it, 9 mana for 3 6/6s will be enough to win the game.
Yeah.
And you'll also, what, freeze a few minions? It's good, but I think he'll just be dead by that point.
So A8 can go Thundery Strider. Pass, I guess. But he could go Thundery Strider, Gadgets and Auctioneer, Backstab, something, just to guarantee the draws now. Depends how aggressively he feels the need to summon these 4/4 spiders. Is summoning them this turn and then getting to attack with them next turn, is that good enough to just win the game outright? Would he prefer to wait an extra turn, not draw an extra card through his deck and summon them?
So is his deck literally just spiders now?
No.
So many.
He still has 4.
Oh, no, sorry, yeah, because he hasn't actually played
Yeah.
the Feldor Strider yet. Sorry, my mistake.
But, however, if you were to play the Strider, the Auctioneer, and a Backstab now,
Be very likely.
chances are he's summoning at least 2 of those things.
I think I like holding back, though. Like, this is still a scary board for Lee to deal with. Taking 4 damage a turn is something that he absolutely has to try and mitigate. And I think, now that I've taken a little think about it, I've seen the lines for China. They get Blazing Invocation off of Hagatha, and then discover the Grumble once again.
Doomsayer has the potential to do a lot of work here. Hex the Feldor Strider, drop the Doomsayer. It's down to A8 to then remove it, or he loses all of the 4/4s he summons next turn.
Yeah, which is why I like holding onto the Valspine. Like, I was looking at for A8, just going for Valspine as a body on the previous turn, because there's not that much that he wants to actually kill anymore now that he's destroyed the
Oh my
Grumble.
goodness. Lee and Team China have just said this Doomsayer
Whoa.
has to proc at the end of the turn.
That's sick!
And actually, it will proc at the end of the turn. Leroy... Okay, so Valspine deals with one. Backstab, Weapon deals with another.
You have no space on the board, though. Oh, no, wait. So you sacrifice... You go Backstab, sacrifice off a 1/1.
Yeah, play Valspine.
You can kill it
Shadow
off.
Step it, play the Valspine again. That Shadow Step ended up being the draw that allowed this, because, like, Backstab, trade a 1/2, use the Feldori to trade the other one. Leroy, trade in, Weapon goes in.
Yeah, you could have done...
Could have done it, actually, just...
Oh, no, wait. It wouldn't have had space on board.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Didn't have played
So the
Vast
Shadow
later
Step
on.
top deck did allow him to clear off this, which is so important because Shadow Step is not the most common of cards nowadays.
No. Most players don't like it. Players have been saying, you know, look at sites like HS Replay, Shadow Step is a low win rate card.
Yeah.
We don't run it. Well, it's just dramatically improved Poland's win rate for this game.
And just look now at the situation that A8 has found himself in. This is what I was describing, where even with a Shadowhawk off the top, it's uncastable.
Yeah.
Even if you can't get in the damage early on, you will end up with this board state pretty much every time, as long as you don't die to the Shadowhawk, where you just have an unbeatably large board.
So A8 has 28 damage, including his weapon, which means in order to survive, Yulov has to play, or sorry, Lee has to play Healing Rain, which he doesn't have, or a Taunt, which he doesn't have. Acolyte plus Hex.
His own Acolyte, or
Well, genuinely,
one of the other ones.
Genuinely, that would allow him to survive.
Yeah, but you'd Hex one of the other minions more than that.
That's,
surely.
yeah, that's true. That's better. Oh
yeah, hexing an opposing minion is better than mine. Yeah, a good point.
Well, the issue is if A8 somehow gets board space, then he can play the Leroy. So, you know, if A8 were to have a Shiver or Backstab or something, then actually hexing the opponent's minions would be worse.
I don't think
Hopefully
that's worth
China
playing.
know what the last card is. It's Eviscerate, and actually, because 2 minions got hexed, it's still not quite lethal.
Not quite going to be getting there, but it still demands absolutely an answer from China in this scenario. And even looking at this game objectively, if the Grumble had not been burned, would they even be winning this game necessarily? Like, they're taking such a beating. Would they even have time to go for Murmuring Grumble and then Shadowhawk on the next turn?
Murmuring Shadowhawk. That would have been the game-winning play, but
maybe?
As you said, they may not have lived long enough to get there.
Because they had to go for double Hex on this turn. It would have been close.
What an
very close.
exciting game, though. Completely flipped upside down by Hagatha, drawn from Farsight and played on turn 7.
And maybe if they'd saved it, that would be the saving play here. That's also something to go back to. If they could go Murmuring into Hagatha on this turn, obviously the game would have shaped up completely differently.
Yeah.
But having, no matter how the game shapes up, you have to anticipate this kind of a scenario where you face down an unbeatably large board in the hyper late game because of the fact that they have those Faldori Striders. And Lee did not have a contingency plan to deal with that.
Random spells like Crushing Hands, though, have done a lot of work, and Spirit Echoes, etc., have done a lot of work in keeping Lee alive. There's a Volcano. Doesn't quite remove enough from the board.
So even if they get Lightning Storm off of the Murmuring and clear the board, they're still just dead.
There's still Leroy Eviscerate in hand, and China will know that there's Leroy Eviscerate in hand, assuming they've been
if they go
tracking the cards.
Shadowhawk, they can Hagatha some of the minions, heal up a little bit. It's their only real shot and hope that all the freezes work in the right order.
And don't do that, basically.
Yeah, and don't do exactly that.
That one's fine. But as we can see, it wasn't nearly enough to save Lee, who is now dead on board with the dagger as well. Whoa, eventually A8 manages to take this game. We're going to game number 5 for an epic conclusion to the series between 2 of the leading teams in this tournament, China and Poland. It all comes down to this. One of these teams that wins this game will go 3-0 in the Hearthstone Global Games Swiss.
They will indeed, and what a way to be ending it. It's been such a crazy series so far. Odd Warrior beating Taunt Warrior. It was looking like Shadowhawk Shaman might be beating the Miracle Rogue as well there, because it's a good matchup for the Miracle Rogue, but far from unlosable. But even then, very nicely played by Team Poland there. I think that was a deserved victory.
I need a second to calm down after that game. We are going to go to one more short break, but after that, as I said, the epic conclusion of Poland versus China. Don't go anywhere. The score is 2-2 here for Poland versus China, and it all comes down to this. It's going to be Even Warlock versus Aggro Mage. Derek, which team is going to take this series?
It is impossible to tell at such an early stage.
Impossible to tell.
possible. However, I would have to say that Poland are looking to be in a pretty good spot here. They've got the aggro mage up against the even warlock for China. And while this is not quite so good of a matchup for the aggro mage as it would be against the likes of Q-Block, I believe, rather than Evenlock, you're still in a pretty good spot a lot of the time, I find. If you are trying to do as much damage to your opponent as possible, and your opponent is trying to do as much damage to themselves as possible, that kind of sounds like a recipe for success.
Yes, it does. However, we saw a couple of the games with Agromage versus Priest earlier today. The one that we cast, the Priest one, the one the other guys cast, the Agromage one. But our game had Dustbreakers.
Yes.
And Warlock has Hellfires.
Yeah.
And Spellstones and Shroom Brewers.
Yeah.
And other ways of healing as well. So again, I think it comes down to how quickly and how aggressively the mage can deal this damage in the early game.
It does indeed. As we get a look into the game, going to be Dogmeat piloting the aggro mage. Kind of feels to me like Dogmeat, after talking to the players, is kind of the least well-known or the kind of the outlier in the Polish scene, as A8 is obviously good friends with his teammates, or with his Polish teammates, Tutek and Dawido, and I think they were kind of expecting Zeno as one of the other big Polish players to be voted onto the team as well. But it seems like, despite their differences, they've been making a fantastic run of it so far here at the Hearthstone Global Games.
You can't deny that. They haven't dropped a series yet. And even if they lose this one, they've
Still in a good spot.
fought to the bitter end against China. China, who have beaten the USA. They've beaten France. And that's just incredible.
That is a very, very difficult streak of teams to be going up against. And even Poland is not much of a, relenting in terms of how good the teams are.
So what do we think of this aggro mage start then, Derek? There's no mana word in sight, which is the first key analysis that I'm going to point out to you right there.
There is no mana worm. You are correct, and that's kind of what I think of this starting hand as well. It's pretty good. You've obviously got multiple options available to you. We could see immediate board dominance of the or aggression of the highest order with something like Coin Archaeologist into Sorcerer's Apprentice missiles, or even just Coin Archaeologist on this turn. It sets you up very nicely for an Sorcerer's Apprentice on the following turn if you don't draw anything better, and it just gets that damage in. Getting in your minions as quick as you possibly can in order to fight back against an early Hellfire is very important.
All right, so typically here in this stage of the game, an Even Warlock would be wanting to tap to get their Giants cheaper, to get their other big cards like Giants, Twilight Drakes. Though China already have a Giant, they already have a Twilight Drake. Are they considering Doomsayer?
I think very heavily. Like, what's the alternative play? They go tap Doomsayer here, and your opponent plays looking at the deck list, they could go for Sorcerer's Apprentice, Armani Berserker, another Archaeologist. They're just so likely, I think, to be able to kill it off on the following turn. Going for tap on this turn, Doomsayer tap on the next turn is just a little bit too greedy. Just throw it down here. You'll lock down the board, and then on the next turn, you can go tap again, and you'll have a pretty decent chance, like a non-zero chance, to find yourself with maybe a Vulgar Homunculus, maybe even another Doomsayer, a Sun Fury Protector, just something to start playing onto this board.
It did take a long time for them to get to that conclusion, but it's going to pay off, as we can see Dogmeat has no way currently of dealing with this Wild Pyromancer. And
Doomsayer.
Sorry, with this Doomsayer.
It is orange.
I always
It
get
is
those
orange.
mixed up for some reason. And no way of really doing anything worthwhile whatsoever. They can't play their 3-mana cards like Arcane Intellect, like Secrets, etc. He can't do anything.
And this is the downside of Poland's play. Going for Coin into a minion makes them obviously less vulnerable to Hellfire because they're getting in their damage before the Hellfire can even come down in 2 turns' time, or 3 turns' time when they played it, sorry. But it does mean that they can't use their utility cards, their Secrets and Arcane Intellect, to fill out their mana in the turns when their opponent is just developing Doomsayer. As a Hellfire is picked up, and the Secret is not really the one they're looking for in this scenario, with Explosive Runes unable to fight back against the power of a Hellfire, because in this matchup, Counterspell really feels to me to be the more dominant of the Secrets. They have very few super cheap spells, with Defile kind of being the cheapest option they have to get rid of the Counterspell, sorry. And if you find your opponent getting rid of a Counterspell with a Defile, you're pretty happy.
Yep, for sure. I mean, Counterspell is certainly the most important secret here, is it can deny health, it can deny the Hellfire, which we've already spoken about several times as being relevant. And yeah, if it's just stopping a Defile, then it's not so bad for the Warlock.
So looking at Dogmeat's turn here, what he plays very much has to be influenced by what he anticipates his opponent will play on the following turn. So if he's looking at filling out his mana as aggressively as possible with explosive runes, I think that he needs to be very cautious about making that play, because there's a lot of stuff that can go pretty wrong from there. If your opponent plays Twilight Drake in that scenario, all of a sudden you're just met with a minion on board and you haven't developed anything. Things start to spiral out of control very quickly indeed, which is why I love playing one of the minions here in either Sorcerer's Apprentice or the Armani Berserker. And also just playing out the Arcane Missiles
Freeze
here.
it in
Yeah.
while it's guaranteed to go to the
Exactly. There's no better scenario for it in this matchup than right here. They don't have small, low-health minions like against an odd paladin or something
Dogmeat
that you want to be clearing
would
off.
love to have played Cinderstorm or something at the same time.
Yeah, true.
This is a complicated turn, though, because he could ping the Imani Berserker, swing 5 to the face immediately, and develop another 2-drop. However, that puts China dead on Hook's Reaver range. Then again, that's sort of unavoidable with this deck. The whole game plan is to go face. Poland can't really afford to not go face. The other play would be Life Drinker and go face with the Imani Berserker, which also puts China down to 15. So there's no getting around it, really.
Yeah, so if you go for no damage through to face outside of the Armani Berserker attack, which gets them down to 18, that means they would only be able to tap down to 16, which is 1 health off, so the perfect amount of health to put them at to fight back against a Hooked Reaver. And I think while you said it's unavoidable, it's actually quite important in this scenario to not let your opponent Hooked Reaver, because your hand is not pure burst damage, it's board presence. You want to be playing your minions here in the form of Sorcerer's Apprentice and Armani Berserker, or even explosive runes, just whatever you want to throw down to fight back. I think this is a really nice turn, because as you mentioned, it's very important to make sure they can't play the Hooked Reaver.
It's also causing China to play around Counterspell now as well, so
Very good.
Trunks may not want to just drop Hellfire here, potentially lose it, and then take more damage to the face next turn. Then again, what
What does he do outside of that?
better choice has he got?
Yeah. You go for another Drake on this turn, a Giant, because it soaks up an explosive runes potentially. You're still taking damage through to the face, however, which you just want to be avoiding at all costs at this point.
That's a scary thought. The Imani Berserker is a potential, again, of 5 damage in this turn, and this time, I don't think Poland have any reason not to go for it. They need to push that into the face. They could trade with the Mountain Giant, I guess, and again, keep China out of tap Hooked Reaver's stat, but
It's not the most insane thing I've ever heard,
he needs to kill him, though.
but yeah, you need to kill him, exactly. And they're going to be trading with their Mountain Giant probably at some point soon anyway.
Ping the Imani, play Arcane Intellect, ping the Imani, play the second Imani, or even Glyph. It's annoying that there's a big question mark over whether or not we get to turn 10 for Poland to be able to cast that Wild Pyromancer.
Poland here still all in on filling out their mana as efficiently as they possibly can. The Arcane Intellect here, which is a very low tempo play indeed. Obviously, well, a 0 tempo play. You're not doing anything to affect the board whatsoever. But they're opting to go for trade the Armani and play another one. Playing around Shroomborough? Because in this scenario, if you have 2 minions on board and you push everything to face, if they go Hellfire, they kill off their own Giant. If they trade in their own Giant, brilliant, you've just gained 2 damage to the opponent's face. If they go Shroomborough on their Giant and then trade, they've used a Shroomborough on something that isn't their face.
That did seem overly defensive, but again, the only reason I can think of that they'd opt for that play instead is to keep China out of the Hooked Reaver range.
Which is a valid point, and it's also playing around something like trade with the Drake, Amethyst Spellstone on the other one, and then the Giant goes face. Because all of a sudden, the Even Warlock could start to represent a pretty good amount of counter pressure. But even so, I just think for the Mage here, they need to realize board control has gone. They've lost it at this point, really. Like, there's too much stuff that China can do to pull things back. They need to be squeezing in every single point of damage that they possibly can through to the face. Because although a couple turns ago, I said their hand was not all burst damage, at this point, it potentially pretty much is all burst damage.
Yep, I mean, Primordial Glyph certainly is usually burst damage. There are quite a few of the cards that can go face.
One would hope so.
Never mind.
Polymorph's all right. Book of Spectres is... I guess actually if you draw minions, those aren't really the cards you want here.
The other two are better though. Polymorph and Frost Nova even, just to keep that Mana Worm alive. or force out the Hellfire, or the Spellstone, I guess, is the downside there.
Book of Spectres, however, does not discard a Luneth, so it does get you a little bit closer to that. If you're thinking that's the only way you win, that would have been the pick, but I don't think that is their only way to win, which is why I like holding on to the Frost Nova instead to freeze the board here and try and get through that little bit of burst damage.
These cards are a bit awkward though. The second set of Discovers there goes with the Meteor because that could deal with a minion, potentially clear this board, but it's not ideal. Where are the Pyroblasts? Where are the Fireballs and Frostbolts?
But then again, here for Trunks, another awkward turn. What does he do here? Do you go for Hellfire, taking extra damage, killing off your own Twilight Drake? Do you go for a lesser Amethyst Spellstone? Only gaining 3 off that is kind of bad when you have 2 Hellfires in hand. And outside of that, you're just taking damage through to the face. I guess you can Spellbreaker it as... Yeah, I guess that's pretty good.
Your magic shall not
Oh, sure, I hadn't seen that play. It's the most pressure for China. They are starting to ramp that damage up, threaten lethal in a few turns. But Fireball, Frostbolt available for Dogmeat here. Meteor plus Frostbolt, another option.
Very nice positioning as well for Trunks
Yeah.
around the Meteor. Obviously not something you're usually anticipating, but you do, if you're playing correctly, need to play around it in this matchup.
I wonder.
10 damage potential with Fireball, Frostbolt, and also the Mana Worm going face, but with that second Pyroblast still unavailable to be played for another 2 turns, it's probably not the way to go. Poland still feels the need to reduce some of this damage on the board.
And interestingly here for China, because they went for the option of silencing the Mana Worm rather than silencing their own Skulking Geist in order to trade in, they end up with an extra 4/3 on board, which they would not have otherwise. But they do end up in a position where they've taken 1 extra damage, which seems on face value like a pretty obvious trade. If you could have a 0 mana 4/3 that meant you took 1 damage, that's a fantastic card. But 1 damage is a huge deal in this instance. You just need to protect every single life point. But having said that, I guess you're more vulnerable to losing board control than losing health at this point, because you've got double Shroomburrow and a Spellstone, all of which would help you massively in recovering your health total.
And ball control does seem to be the name of the game here, as Poland were even struggling last turn to work out where they wanted to put that Meteor. Either way, Trunks ends up with a 4/3 on the board. It's just a case of whether there's a damaged one or a healthy one. I decided to get rid of the damaged one, prevent any healing on it, which makes a lot of sense. But as you said, healing comes in now, but the board control at the same time, and Dogmeat really needs that Aluneth sooner rather than later. He needs to be able to play all of these burn spells.
Well, let's do a little bit of maths here in terms of the actual hard health totals that China is working with here. Fireball Frostbolt ping on this turn is 10 damage, bringing your opponent down to 10. They can heal back up to 14 on the following turn. I mean, you kind of have to expect a 4 damage heal at this point, or maybe 3, because Shroomburrow or Spellstone, you know that your opponent has not damaged themselves with cards, so Spellstone can be at maximum 3 health gained. So it's not really that ridiculous for Dogmeat to expect to be able to go Fireball Frostbolt ping on this turn, Life Drinker ping on the next turn, and then go for Pyroblast on the following turn to close out the game. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with that. You could anticipate Shroomburrow, Spellstone, or Gul'dan. You give your opponent time to play in that scenario.
Gul'dan would be a problem, but we're talking 24 damage total there, so it does play around the single Shroomburrow.
And what else do you have is the main thing. Like, as I said, it's unlikely to work out, to be honest, but you kind of just have to go for it.
It's getting to that point in the game where it is the only way to win.
Yeah.
So Dogmeat going to go for it. Is there a reason to hold back the Frostbolt here? I'm struggling to think of one. If they're completely sure that there's no healing in Trunks' hand, they could use it on a minion, I guess, and then Life Drink and Pyroblast would still be lethal in 2 turns, but decides to hold back, make the decision a little bit later.
I mean, if you go for Frostbolt on this turn, it allows you to go for Cinderstorm, Life Drink, Hero Power for the perfect 9 mana turn. On the following turn, maybe he's thinking he could go for Frostbolt to kill off one of the minions, thus maximizing the chance of Cinderstorms going face. But I think I actually preferred in this scenario just everything launching to face. Obviously, his thinking is maybe I just die on the following turn, but you know that you can heal up to 21 with the Life Drinker on this turn, which is relevant. Your opponent now has 16, up to 21. You will be dead on the following turn due to double Hellfire, but you kind of need to be optimistic about that. You can't be firing off Frostbolts into minions here. I think that should have gone face. because it's just not optimistic enough from Poland. They are unlikely to be winning this in this scenario, I agree, but they need to pray that they somehow can.
Cinderstorm needs to deal with the Spellbreaker as well, as we can see from because of the 6 burst damage in the hand.
Or they just go Frostbolt face here, is their thinking, because that gets them to exactly 10.
Right. So that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
As we can see. Well, not only is there the Spellstone, which would heal Trunks for 3, but there's also the double Hellfire, which... Yeah, that's going face. Double Hellfire is an extra 6 burst damage.
16, 19, 22.
22 damage on the board. China doing it again. Let's go down. As if they didn't need more insult to injury. China doing it again. They have now won 3 matches in a row in the Hearthstone Global Games Swiss. Now that is a performance like to be very, very proud of.
Absolutely, and it's very nice to see here for China because their performance at the Summer Championships was actually somewhat underwhelming, to be perfectly honest. Lee, who here is playing in the Global Games, was also a representative at the Summer Championships, was basically giving it all that while he was there. In his interviews, he was bigging himself up, saying he's not afraid of anyone, he's the best player by miles, there's no way he can lose, and then he just insta-dropped 0-2. Like, he dropped out of that tournament so fast you would not believe. It does happen. It was also hilarious how hard he slam dunked himself. But it's nice to see that they're turning this around here because clearly they are showing some pretty strong play here.
But also last year in the Hearthstone Global Games, China didn't get off to a good start at all. I believe they lost their first 2 or 3 matches in a row, then came back, recovered, and did make it into the second phase. But the fact that they've started strong here, this is a worldly performance from China, and they should be very happy with themselves there. As we take a look at the matches that just went down all the way to game number 5 for the first time today. And it was close, but China took it eventually, winning the losing the weird matchup at the start with their Kingsbane Rogue, their fake news deck, according to Poland, but winning the mirror-ish in the Odd Warrior versus Taunt Warrior, mirror-ish there, because it's not a mirror, and really the Taunt Warrior should have been favoured, so that win was very big and very important for China.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That was definitely the match, the game of the series for me as we start to take a look back at the highlights. It feels like most of the other games kind of went as expected. Here, the Token Druid got a very nice starting hand, and although there are ways that we were hypothesizing the Rogue could come back, basically the Druid was in the driving seat throughout. And then in this matchup, it was one of the most decisive victories we've seen in a very long time. 7-1 Argent Squire, dealt 21 damage, I believe, and just closed out the game in a heartbeat.
Yeah, that one just wasn't even close, but this one was a very long, drawn-out match between YouLove and A3650, which ended up in this, just Ungaro packs value, value, and Poland not quite being able to get the job done with their hero power. Then there was the Shadowhawk Shaman, which also was a drawn-out game that got very close, thanks to the turn 6 Hagatha being played and generating a lot of random spells, which did come in handy, but not handy enough, as Lee had no way of dealing with that final board full of 4/4s.
Exactly, which very arguably was of his own doing. By not saving that Murmuring Elemental Hagatha, as we identified at the start, he had no contingency plan against a board full of spiders, which Poland played perfectly towards. They were going for the just pretty much standard rogue game plan, even though China was flying around with grumbles exploding and ancestral spirit on Doomsayers. Valera was just having absolutely none of that, throwing down the usual Cold Bloods, Leroy's, Gadgets, and ending the game in a very convincing fashion indeed.
That was a favourite play of mine as well, the
very
Doomsayer
cool.
with the ancestral spirit.
That was a very cool play.
That's one I'd like to look back on. And if not for the top deck of the Shadow Step there, that would have cleared the board, and maybe China would have taken the series there and then.
And even in this particular match, it did not quite go in Poland's way, with them identifying their game plan, I think, fairly well early on, but there were a couple of ways they could have eked out more damage. Like going face with the Armani Berserker rather than trading into the Mountain Giant. But having said that, the way they ultimately lost the game was the counter pressure, the fact that there was too much damage coming in from their opponent. And if they had not traded against the Giant, that would have been even more of a threat to them. So maybe I'm overestimating, to be honest, how much damage they could survive there, and taking the slightly more defensive line did give them the best chance.
But that is China versus Poland finish. Next up, we have a pretty exciting game. It's going to be Germany versus Greece, the match that we've claimed as the feature match of the week. We'll be showing you one more time the results of the poll that we did yesterday during the community show, who you guys think are going to win between this match, and then Gaskin and Lorinda will be bringing you that. So we'll be back with more Hearthstone Global Games after this.